The regular early morning yell of horror was the sound of Arthur Dent waking up and suddenly remembering where he was. It wasn't just that the cave was cold. It wasn't just that it was damp and smelly. It was the fact that the cave was in the middle of Islington, and there wasn't a bus due for 2 million years. Time is the worst place, so to speak, to get lost in, as Arthur Dent could testify, having been lost in both time and space a good deal. At least being lost in space kept you busy. He was stranded in prehistoric Earth as the result of a complex sequence of events which had involved him being alternately blown up and insulted in more bizarre regions of the galaxy than he had ever dreamt existed. And though life had now turned very, very, very quiet, he was still feeling jumpy. He hadn't been blown up now for 5 years. Since he had hardly seen anyone since he and Ford Prefect had parted company 4 years previously, he hadn't been insulted in all that time either, except just once. It had happened on a spring evening about 2 years previously. He was returning to his cave just a little after dusk when he became aware of lights flashing eerily through the clouds. He turned and stared, with hope suddenly clambering through his heart. Rescue! Escape! The castaway's impossible dream, a ship. And as he watched, as he stared in wonder and excitement, a long silver ship descended through the warm evening air, quietly, without fuss, its long legs unlocking in a smooth ballet of technology. It alighted gently on the ground, and what little hum it had generated died away as if lulled by the evening calm. A ramp extended itself. Light streamed out. A tall figure appeared silhouetted in the hatchway. It walked down the ramp and stood in front of Arthur.
"You're a jerk, Dent."
It was alien. Very alien. It had a peculiar alien tallness, a peculiar alien flattened head, peculiar slitty little alien eyes, extravagantly draped golden robes with a peculiar alien collar design, and pale, grey-green alien skin, which had about it that lustrous sheen which most grey-green faces can only acquire with plenty of exercise and very expensive soap. Arthur boggled at it. He was feeling the effects of having not said anything to anybody for as long as he could remember. The alien creature frowned briefly and consulted what appeared to be some species of clipboard which he was holding in his thin and spindly alien hand.
"Arthur Dent? Arthur Philip Dent?"
Yes,
"You're a jerk. A complete asshole."
The creature nodded to itself, made a peculiar alien tick on its clipboard, and turned briskly back towards its ship. Said Arthur desperately.
Don't give me that."
It marched up the ramp, through the hatchway, and disappeared into its ship.
Hey!"
shouted Arthur, and started to run helplessly towards it.
"Wait a minute! What is this? What? Wait a minute! Come back here and say that!"
He jumped and danced until his legs trembled, and shouted till his lungs rasped. There was no answer from anyone. There was no one to hear him or speak to him. The alien ship was already thundering towards the upper reaches of the atmosphere. Its occupant, the alien with the expensive complexion, leaned back in its single seat. His name was Wowbagger the Infinitely Prolonged, one of the universe's very small number of immortal beings. Those who are born immortal instinctively know how to cope with it, but Wowbagger was not one of them. Indeed, he had come to hate them, the load of serene bastards. To begin with, it was fun. He had a ball, living dangerously, taking risks, cleaning up on high-yield long-term investments, and just generally outliving the hell out of everybody. In the end, it was the Sunday afternoons he couldn't cope with, and that terrible listlessness which starts to set in about 2:55, when you know that you've had all the baths you can usefully have that day, and that as you stare at the clock, the hands will move relentlessly on to 4 o'clock, and you will enter the long, dark tea-time of the soul. So things began to pall for him. The merry smiles he used to wear at other people's funerals began to fade. He began to despise the universe in general, and everybody in it in particular. This was the point at which he conceived his purpose. the thing which would drive him on, and which, as far as he could see, would drive him on forever. It was this. He would insult the universe. That is, he would insult everybody in it, individually, personally, one by one, and, this was the thing he really decided to grit his teeth over, in alphabetical order. The ship fled on through the night. Meanwhile, on Earth, it began to pour with rain, and Arthur Dent sat in his cave and had one of the most truly rotten evenings of his entire life, thinking of things he could have said to the alien, and swatting flies, who also had a rotten evening. The next day he made himself a pouch out of rabbit skin, because he thought it would be useful to keep things in. This morning, 2 years later than that, was sweet and fragrant as he emerged from the cave he called home. Though his throat was sore again from his early morning yell of horror, he was suddenly in a terrifically good mood. He wrapped his dilapidated dressing-gown tightly around him and beamed at the bright morning. He had just had a wonderful idea about how to cope with a terribly lonely isolation. He beamed again, and took a bite out of a rabbit leg left over from his supper. He chewed happily for a few moments, and then decided formally to announce his decision. To add weight to his words, he stuck the rabbit bone in his hair. He spread his arms out wide. "I will go mad," he announced. "Good idea," said Ford Prefect, clambering down from the rock on which he had been sitting. Arthur's brain somersaulted. His jaw did press-ups. "I went mad for a while," said Ford. "Did me no end of good." Arthur's eyes did cartwheels. "You see," said Ford. "Where have you been?" interrupted Arthur, now that his head had finished working out. "Around and about." "I went to Africa," said Ford. "And this is your cave, is it?" Yes," said Arthur. He felt very strange. After nearly 4 years of total isolation, he was so pleased and relieved to see Ford that he could almost cry. Ford was, on the other hand, an almost immediately annoying person. "Very nice," said Ford, in reference to Arthur's cave. "You must hate it." Arthur didn't bother to reply. "Africa was very interesting," said Ford. "I behaved very oddly there, but I won't disturb you with the details because they would—" "What?" "Disturb you. But you may be interested to know that I am single-handedly responsible for the evolved shape of the animal you came to know in later centuries as a giraffe, and I tried to learn to fly. Do you believe me?" "Well, tell me." "I'll tell you later. I'll just mention what the guide says." "The guide? The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you remember?" "Yes, I remember throwing it in the river." "Yes," said Ford, "but I fished it out." "The guide says that there is an art to flying," said Ford, "or rather a knack. The knack lies in learning how to throw yourself at the ground and miss." He smiled weakly. He pointed at the knees of his trousers and held his arms up to show the elbows. They were all torn and worn through. "I haven't done very well so far," he said. He stuck out his hand. "I'm very glad to see you again, Arthur," he added. Arthur shook his head in a sudden access of emotion and bewilderment. "I haven't seen anyone for years. Not anyone. I can hardly even remember how to speak. I keep forgetting words. I practice, you see. I practice by talking to... What are those things people think you're mad if you talk to? We're surrounded by them, for heaven's sake. I've planted hundreds myself. They all died. Trees! I practice by talking to trees." "What's that for?" Ford still had his hand stuck out. "Shake," prompted Ford. Arthur did, nervously at first, as if it might turn out to be a fish. Then he grasped it vigorously with both hands in an overwhelming flood of relief. He shook it and shook it. After a while, Ford found it necessary to disengage. They climbed to the top of a nearby outcrop of rock and surveyed the scene around them. "What happened to the Golgafrinchans?" asked Ford. "A lot of them didn't make it through the winter 3 years ago, and the few who remained in the spring said they needed a holiday and set off on a raft. History says that they must have survived." "Huh," said Ford. "Well, well." Suddenly, there was about Ford a sense of energy and purpose. "We're going," he said excitedly, and shivered with energy. "Where? How?" "I don't know," said Ford, "but I just feel that the time is right. Things are going to happen. We're on our way. I have detected disturbances in the wash." "The wash?" "The space-time wash." "Are we talking about—" Some sort of Vogon laundromat, or what are we talking about? Eddies, said Ford, in the space-time continuum. Ah, is he? What? Said Ford. Who is Eddie, then, exactly, then? Ford looked angrily at him. Will you listen? I have been listening, said Arthur, but I'm not sure it's helped. Ford grasped him by the lapels of his dressing gown and spoke to him as slowly and distinctly and patiently as if he were somebody from a telephone company accounts department. There seem to be some pools of instability in the fabric of space-time. Ah, that, said Arthur. Yes, that. They stood there alone on a hill on prehistoric Earth and stared each other resolutely in the face. Arthur, hello, yes? Just believe everything I tell you, and it will all be very, very simple. Ah, well, I'm not sure I believe that. They sat down and composed their thoughts. Ford got out his sub-ether sensormatic. It was making vague humming noises, and a tiny light on it was flickering faintly. Flat battery? No, said Ford, there is a moving disturbance in the fabric of space-time, an eddy, a pool of instability, and it's somewhere in our vicinity. Where? There, said Ford, shooting out his arm. There, behind that sofa. Arthur looked. Much to his surprise, there was a velvet, paisley-covered Chesterfield sofa in the field in front of them. He boggled intelligently at it. Shrewd questions sprang into his mind. Why is there a sofa in that field? I told you, shouted Ford, leaping to his feet. Eddies in the space-time continuum. And this is his sofa, is it? Arthur, shouted Ford at him, that sofa is there because of the space-time instability I've been trying to get your terminally softened brain to get to grips with. It's been washed up out of the continuum. It's space-time jetsam. It doesn't matter what it is. We've got to catch it. It's our only way out of here. Catch it, muttered Arthur, then frowned in bemusement as he saw that the Chesterfield was lazily bobbing and wafting away across the grass. With a whoop of utterly unexpected delight, he leapt down the rock and plunged off in hectic pursuit of Ford Prefect and the irrational piece of furniture. They careered wildly through the grass, leaping, laughing, shouting instructions to each other to head the thing off this way or that way. Ford and Arthur pounded chaotically after it, but it dodged and weaved as if following its own complex mathematical topography, which it was. Still they pursued, and suddenly they were practically on top of it. With a heave and a shout, they leapt on it. The sun winked out. They fell through a sickening nothingness and emerged unexpectedly in the middle of the pitch at Lord's Cricket Ground, St. John's Wood, London, towards the end of the last test match of the Australian series in the year 1980-something, with England needing only 28 runs to win. Important facts from Galactic History number 1. Reproduced from the Sidereal Daily Mentioner's Book of Popular Galactic History. The night sky over the planet Cricket is the least interesting sight in the entire universe. It was a charming and delightful day at Lord's, as Ford and Arthur tumbled haphazardly out of a space-time anomaly and hit the immaculate turf rather hard. The applause of the crowd was tremendous. It wasn't for them, but instinctively they bowed anyway, which was fortunate because the small red heavy ball which the crowd actually had been applauding whistled mere millimetres over Arthur's head. In the crowd, a man collapsed. "What was that?" hissed Arthur. "Something red," hissed Ford back at him. "Where are we?" Somewhere green." "Shapes," muttered Arthur. "I need shapes." "This your sofa?" said a voice. "What was that?" whispered Ford. Arthur looked up. "Something blue," he said. "Shape?" said Ford. Arthur looked again. "It is shaped like a policeman." "Come on, you two. Let's be having you." These words had an electrifying effect on Arthur. He leapt to his feet like an author hearing the phone ring, and shot a series of startled glances at the panorama around him, which had suddenly settled down into something of quite terrifying ordinariness. "Where did you get this from?" he yelled at the policeman's shape. "What did you say?"
This is Lord's cricket ground, isn't it? Snapped Arthur. Where did you find it? How did you get it here? I think that I had better calm down. He squatted down abruptly in front of Ford. It is a policeman, he said. Having said this, he sauntered off towards the edge of the pitch, brushing down his dressing gown. He then noticed his dressing gown and stopped. He stared at it. He flung himself at the policeman. So where did I get these clothes from? He collapsed and lay twitching on the grass. Ford shook his head. He's had a bad 2,000,000 years, he said to the policeman, and together they heaved Arthur onto the sofa and carried him off the pitch, and were only briefly hampered by the sudden disappearance of the sofa on the way. Reactions to all this from the crowd were many and various. Most of them couldn't cope with watching it, and listened to it on the radio instead.
Well, this is an interesting incident, Brian. I don't think there have been any mysterious materializations on the pitch since... Well, I don't think there have been any, have there, that I recall? Edgbaston, 1932? No, what happened then? Well, Peter, I think it was Cantor facing Wilcox coming up to bowl from the pavilion end when a spectator suddenly ran straight across the pitch. Yes, there's nothing actually very mysterious about that, is there? He didn't actually materialize, did he? He just ran on. And for those of you who've just tuned in, you may be interested to know that two men, two rather scruffily attired men, and indeed a sofa, a Chesterfield, I think, yes, a Chesterfield, have just materialized here in the middle of Lord's cricket ground. But I don't think they meant any harm. They've been very good-natured about it, and... Sorry, can I interrupt you a moment, Peter, and say that the sofa has just vanished? So it has. Well, that's one mystery less. Still, it's definitely one for the record books, I think, particularly occurring at this dramatic moment in play. England now needing only 24 runs to win the series. The men are leaving the pitch in the company of a police officer, and I think everyone's settling down now, and play is about to resume.
Now, sir, perhaps you'd care to tell me who you are, where you come from, and what that little scene was all about. Ford looked at the ground for a moment as if steadying himself for something. Then he straightened up and aimed a look at the policeman which hit him with the full force of every inch of the 6 light-years distance between Earth and Ford's home near Beetlejuice. "All right," said Ford, very quietly. "I'll tell you." "Yes, well, that won't be necessary," said the policeman hurriedly. "Just don't let whatever it was happen again." The policeman turned round and wandered off in search of anyone who wasn't from Beetlejuice. Fortunately, the ground was full of them. Arthur sat up. "Where am I?" "Lord's cricket ground," said Ford. "Fine." 10 minutes later, hunched over a cup of tea in the refreshment tent, the colour started to come back to his haggard face. "How are you feeling?" said Ford. "I'm home. Home. It's England. It's today. The nightmare is over. I'm where I belong." "There are 2 things I feel I should tell you," said Ford, tossing a copy of The Guardian over the table at him. "One is," he said, pointing at the date at the top of the paper, "that the earth will be demolished in 2 days' time." "I'm home. Tea, cricket, mown grass, wooden benches, white linen jackets, beer cans." Slowly, he began to focus on the newspaper. "I've seen that one before." His eyes wandered slowly up to the date which Ford was idly tapping at. "And the other thing," said Ford, "is that you appear to have a bone in your beard." Arthur was shaking. "Perhaps I should—" "No," said Ford sharply. "What?" "Don't try and phone yourself up at home." "But why not?" said Arthur. "Look," said Ford. He picked up an imaginary phone and dialed an imaginary dial. "Hello, is that Arthur Dent?" "Ah, hello, yes. This is Arthur Dent speaking. Don't hang up." He hung up, he said, shrugged, and put the imaginary phone neatly back on its imaginary hook. A glummer look replaced the already glum look on Arthur Dent's face. "So, we're not home and dry." "We could not even be said," replied Ford, "to be home and vigorously toweling ourselves off." The game continued. The bowler approached the wicket at a lope, a trot, and then a run. He suddenly exploded in a flurry of arms and legs, out of which flew a ball. The batsman swung and thwacked it behind him over the sight screens. Ford's eyes followed the trajectory of the ball and jogged momentarily. He stiffened.
He looked along the flight path of the ball again, and his eyes twitched again. "This isn't my towel," said Arthur, who was rummaging in his rabbit-skin bag. "Shh," said Ford. "I had a Golga Frinchen jogging towel," continued Arthur. "It was blue with yellow stars on it. This isn't it." "This one's pink," said Arthur. "It isn't yours, is it?" "I would like you to shut up about your towel," said Ford. Ford was beginning to behave rather strangely. Regardless of the bemused stares it was provoking from his fellow members of the crowd gathered round the pitch, he was waving his hands in sharp movements across his face, ducking down behind some people, leaping up behind others, then standing still and blinking a lot. After a moment or two of this, he started to stalk forward slowly and stealthily, wearing a puzzled frown of concentration. "This isn't my bag either," said Arthur suddenly. Ford's spell of concentration was broken. He turned angrily on Arthur. "I wasn't talking about my towel," said Arthur. "We've established that that isn't mine. It's just that the bag into which I was putting the towel, which is not mine, is also not mine, though it is extraordinarily similar. Now, personally, I think that that is extremely odd, especially as the bag was one I made myself on prehistoric Earth. These are also not my stones," he added, pulling a few flat grey stones out of the bag. "I was making a collection of interesting stones, and these are clearly very dull ones." A roar of excitement thrilled through the crowd and obliterated whatever it was that Ford said in reply to this piece of information. The cricket ball, which had excited this reaction, fell out of the sky and dropped neatly into Arthur's mysterious rabbit-skin bag. "Now, I would say that that was also a very curious event," said Arthur, rapidly closing the bag and pretending to look for the ball on the ground. Play resumed with a new ball. The sun continued to shine, and Ford continued to jump up and down, shaking his head and blinking. "Something's on your mind, isn't it?" said Arthur. "I think," said Ford, "that there's an SEP over there." "A what?" "An SEP. An SEP," he said, "is something that we can't see or don't see or our brain doesn't let us see because we think that it's somebody else's problem. That's what SEP means. Somebody else's problem. The brain just edits it out. It's like a blind spot. If you look at it directly, you won't see it unless you know precisely what it is. Your only hope is to catch it by surprise out of the corner of your eye." "Ah," said Arthur, "then that's why you've been jumping up and down and blinking and—" "I think you've got the message." "I can see it," said Arthur. "It's a spaceship." For a moment Arthur was stunned by the reaction this revelation provoked. A roar erupted from the crowd, and from every direction people were running, shouting, yelling, tumbling over each other in a tumult of confusion. He stumbled back in astonishment and glanced fearfully around. Then he glanced around again in even greater astonishment. "Exciting, isn't it?" The apparition wobbled in front of Arthur's eyes. "I think your team have just won. You are English, aren't you?" Yes," said Arthur.
"Well, your team, as I say, have just won the match. It means they retain the Ashes. You must be very pleased. I must say I'm rather fond of cricket, though I wouldn't like anyone outside this planet to hear me saying that. Oh, dear, no. Still, it'll all be over in a couple of days, won't it? Though, as I said to you when we last met, I was very sorry about that. Still, whatever will have been, will have been."
Arthur tried to speak, but gave up the unequal struggle. He prodded Ford again. "I thought something terrible had happened," said Ford, "but it's just the end of the game. We ought to get out. Oh, hello, Slarty Bartfast, what are you doing here?"
"Oh, pottering.
"That your ship? Can you give us a lift anywhere?"
Patience.
"Hello, Slarty Bartfast," said Arthur at last.
"Hello, Earthman."
The old man stared keenly onto the pitch, with eyes which seemed alive with expressions that had no apparent bearing on what was happening out there. What was happening was that the crowd was gathering itself into a wide circle round the centre of the pitch. What Slarty Bartfast saw in it, he alone knew. All that seemed to be afoot was a ceremony of some kind. It was being specially staged for the benefit of TV rather than the spectators,
and all they could gather about it, from where they were standing, was what they heard from a nearby radio. Ford was aggressively uninterested. He fretted as he heard it explained that the ashes were about to be presented to the captain of the English team out there on the pitch, fumed when told that this was because they had now won them for the nth time, positively barked with annoyance at the information that the ashes were the remains of a cricket stump. And when, further to this, he was asked to contend with the fact that the cricket stump in question had been burnt in Melbourne, Australia in 1882, to signify the death of English cricket, he rounded on Slarty Bartfast, took a deep breath, but didn't have a chance to say anything because the old man wasn't there. He was marching out onto the pitch with terrible purpose in his gait. His hair, beard, and robes swept behind him, looking very much as Moses would have looked if Sinai had been a well-cut lawn instead of, as it is more usually represented, a fiery, smoking mountain. "He said to meet him at his ship," said Arthur. "What in the name of zarking Fardwarks is the old fool doing?" exploded Ford. "Meeting us at his ship in 2 minutes," said Arthur, with a shrug which indicated total abdication of thought. They started off towards it. Strange sounds reached their ears. They tried not to listen, but could not help noticing that Slarty Bartfast was querulously demanding that he be given the silver urn containing the ashes, as they were, he said, vitally important for the past, present, and future safety of the galaxy, and that this was causing wild hilarity. They resolved to ignore it. What happened next they could not ignore. With a noise like 100,000 people saying, "Whop!" a steely white spaceship suddenly seemed to create itself out of nothing in the air directly above the cricket pitch and hung there with infinite menace and a slight hum. Then it opened up and let something quite extraordinary come out of it. 11 robots. White robots. What was most extraordinary about them was that they appeared to have come dressed for the occasion. Not only were they white, but they carried what appeared to be cricket bats. And not only that, but they also carried what appeared to be cricket balls. And not only that, but they wore white ribbing pads round the lower parts of their legs. These last were extraordinary because they appeared to contain jets which allowed these curiously civilized robots to fly down from their hovering spaceship and start to kill people, which is what they did. "Hello," said Arthur. "Something seems to be happening." "Get to the ship," shouted Ford. "I don't want to know, just get to the ship." He started to run. "I don't want to know, I don't want to see, I don't want to hear," he yelled as he ran. "This is not my planet. I didn't choose to be here. I don't want to get involved. Just get me out of here and get me to a party with people I can relate to." Smoke and flame billowed from the pitch. "Well, this supernatural brigade certainly seems to be out in force here today," burbled a radio happily to itself. "What I need," shouted Ford, "is a strong drink and a peer group." He continued to run, pausing only for a moment to grab Arthur's arm and drag him along with him. "They're playing cricket," muttered Arthur, stumbling along after Ford. "I swear they are playing cricket. They're not just killing people, they're sending them up. Ford, they're sending us up." It would have been hard to disbelieve this without knowing a great deal more galactic history than Arthur had so far managed to pick up in his travels. The ghostly but violent shapes that could be seen moving within the thick pall of smoke seemed to be performing a series of bizarre parodies of batting strokes, the difference being that every ball they struck with their bats exploded wherever it landed. The very first one of these had dispelled Arthur's initial reaction that the whole thing might just be a publicity stunt by Australian margarine manufacturers. And then as suddenly as it had all started, it was over. The 11 white robots ascended through the seething cloud in a tight formation, and with a few last flashes of flame entered the bowels of their hovering white ship, which, with the noise of 100,000 people saying "Whoop!" promptly vanished into the thin air out of which it had whopped. For a moment there was a terrible, stunned silence, and then, out of the drifting smoke emerged the pale figure of Slarty Bartfast, looking even more like Moses, because in spite of the continued absence of the mountain, he was at least now striding across a fiery and smoking, well-mown lawn.
He stared wildly about him until he saw the hurrying figures of Arthur Dent and Ford Prefect forcing their way through the frightened crowd, which was for the moment busy stampeding in the opposite direction. Slarty Bartfast was gesticulating urgently at Ford and Arthur and shouting at them as the three of them gradually converged on his ship, still parked behind the sight screens and still apparently unnoticed by the crowd stampeding past it.
"They've gobble-wobble-fobbled."
"What did he say?" panted Ford as he elbowed his way onwards.
"They've table-wobble-fobbled."
"It sounds urgent," said Arthur.
"They've gobble-wobbled the ashes."
"He says," said Arthur, "that they've taken the ashes. The burnt remains of a cricket stump. It's a trophy. That is apparently what they have come and taken." "Strange thing to want to tell us," snapped Ford. "Strange thing to take." "Strange ship." They had arrived at it. The second strangest thing about the ship was watching the somebody else's problem field at work. They could now clearly see the ship for what it was simply because they knew it was there. It was quite apparent, however, that nobody else could. The most extraordinary thing about it was that it looked only partly like a spaceship, with guidance fins, rocket engines, and escape hatches and so on, and a great deal like a small, up-ended Italian bistro. Ford and Arthur gazed up at it with wonderment and deeply offended sensibilities.
"Yes, I know, but there is a reason. Come, we must go. The ancient nightmare is come again. Doom confronts us all. We must leave at once."
Ford and Arthur followed Slarty Bartfast into the ship, and were so perplexed by what they saw inside it that they were totally unaware of what happened next outside. A spaceship, yet another one, but this one sleek and silver, descended from the sky onto the pitch, quietly, without fuss, its long legs unlocking in a smooth ballet of technology. It landed gently. It extended a short ramp. A tall, grey-green figure marched briskly out and approached the small knot of people who were gathered in the centre of the pitch, tending to the casualties of the recent bizarre massacre. It moved people aside with quiet, understated authority, and came at last to a man lying in a desperate pool of blood, clearly now beyond the reach of any earthly medicine, breathing, coughing his last. The figure knelt down quietly beside him.
"Arthur Philip Deodat."
The man, with horrified confusion in his eyes, nodded feebly.
"You're a no-good Dumbo nothing. I thought you should know that before you went." "Important facts from Galactic History number 2, reproduced from the Sidereal Daily Mentioner's Book of Popular Galactic History. Since this galaxy began, vast civilizations have risen and fallen, risen and fallen, risen and fallen so often that it's quite tempting to think that life in the galaxy must be A. something akin to seasick, space-sick, time-sick, history-sick, or some such thing, and B. stupid."
It seemed to Arthur as if the whole sky suddenly just stood aside and let them through. It seemed to him that the atoms of his brain and the atoms of the cosmos were streaming through each other. "What happened?"
"We took off,"
said Slarty Bartfast. And he stared for a moment at the wide panoramic screen in front of him, which displayed a bewildering complexity of stars streaming like silver threads around them. The interior of the flight deck was dark green, dark red, dark brown, cramped and moodily lit. Inexplicably, the resemblance to a small Italian bistro had failed to end at the hatchway. "How far did we just travel?"
"About 2/3 of the way across the galactic disk, I would say, roughly."
"Where are we going?" said Ford.
"We are going to confront an ancient nightmare of the universe."
"And where are you going to drop us off?"
"I will need your help."
"Tough. Look, there's somewhere you can take us where we can have fun. I'm trying to think of it. We can get drunk and maybe listen to some extremely evil music."
"A curse has arisen from the mists of time. A curse which will engulf the galaxy in fire and destruction and possibly bring the universe to a premature doom. I mean it. Doom! Come. There is much I must show and tell you." He walked towards a green wrought-iron spiral staircase set incomprehensibly in the middle of the flight deck and started to ascend. Arthur, with a frown, followed. Ford stomped up the stairs behind them. "The central computational area is where every calculation affecting the ship in any way is performed. Yes, I know what it looks like, but it is in fact a complex four-dimensional topographical map of a series of highly complex mathematical functions." "It looks like a joke," said Arthur. "I know what it looks like," said Slarty Bartfast, and went into it. It was a large glass cage, or box, in fact, a room. In it was a table, a long one. Around it were gathered about a dozen chairs of the bentwood style. On it was a tablecloth, and on the tablecloth sat some dozen half-eaten Italian meals, and toyed with listlessly by robots. It was all completely artificial. The robot customers were attended by a robot waiter, a robot wine waiter, and a robot maitre d', and all participated in a little dance together, a complex routine involving the manipulation of menus, bill pads, wallets, checkbooks, credit cards, watches, pencils, and paper napkins, which seemed to be hovering constantly on the edge of violence, but never actually getting anywhere. Slarty Bartfast hurried in, and then appeared to pass the time of day quite idly with the maitre d', whilst one of the customer robots, an autorori, slid slowly under the table, mentioning what he intended to do to some guy over some girl. Slarty Bartfast took over the seat which had been thus vacated, and passed a shrewd eye over the menu. The tempo of the routine round the table seemed somehow imperceptibly to quicken. Arguments broke out. People attempted to prove things on napkins. They waved fiercely at each other, and attempted to examine each other's pieces of chicken. The waiter's hand began to move on the bill pad more quickly than a human hand could manage, and then more quickly than a human eye could follow. The pace accelerated. Soon, an extraordinary and insistent politeness overwhelmed the group, and seconds later it seemed that a moment of consensus was suddenly achieved. A new vibration thrilled through the ship. Slarty Bartfast emerged from the glass room. "Bistromatics, the most powerful computational force known to parascience. Come to the room of informational illusions." He swept past and carried them bewildered in his wake. The bistromatic drive is a wonderful new method of crossing vast interstellar distances without all that dangerous mucking about with improbability factors. Bistromatics itself is simply a revolutionary new way of understanding the behavior of numbers. Just as Einstein observed that time was not an absolute, but depended on the observer's movement in space, and that space was not an absolute, but depended on the observer's movement in time, so it is now realized that numbers are not absolute, but depend on the observer's movement in restaurants. The first non-absolute number is the number of people for whom the table is reserved. This will vary during the course of the first 3 telephone calls to the restaurant, and then bear no apparent relation to the number of people who actually turn up. The second non-absolute number is the given time of arrival, which is now known to be one of the most bizarre of mathematical concepts. A reciproverse exclusion, a number whose existence can only be defined as being anything other than itself. In other words, the given time of arrival is the one moment of time at which it is impossible that any member of the party will arrive. The third and most mysterious piece of non-absoluteness of all lies in the relationship between the number of items on the bill, the cost of each item, the number of people at the table, and what they are each prepared to pay for. The baffling discrepancies which used to occur at this point remained uninvestigated for centuries simply because no one took them seriously. They were, at the time, put down to such things as politeness, rudeness, meanness, flashness, tiredness, emotionality, or the lateness of the hour, and completely forgotten about on the following morning. They were never tested under laboratory conditions, of course, because they never occurred in laboratories, not in reputable laboratories at least. And so,
It was only with the advent of pocket computers that the startling truth became finally apparent. And it was this. Numbers written on restaurant bills within the confines of restaurants do not follow the same mathematical laws as numbers written on any other pieces of paper in any other parts of the universe. This single fact took the scientific world by storm. It completely revolutionized it. So many mathematical conferences got held in such good restaurants that many of the finest minds of a generation died of obesity and heart failure, and the science of maths was put back by years. Slowly, however, the implications of the idea began to be understood. To begin with, it had been too stark, too crazy, too much what the man in the street would have said, "Oh, yes, I could have told you that about." Then some phrases like interactive subjectivity frameworks were invented, and everybody was able to relax and get on with it. The small group of monks who had taken up hanging around the major research institutes singing strange chants to the effect that the universe was only a figment of its own imagination were eventually given a street theatre grant and went away. The room of informational illusions was a welcome relief after the visual monstrosities of the central computational area. There was nothing in it. No information, no illusions, just themselves, white walls, and a few small instruments which looked as if they were meant to plug into something which Slarty Bartfast couldn't find. At that moment he located the slot in the wall for which he had been searching and clicked the instrument he was holding into it. "Do not be alarmed, it's—" They didn't hear what he said, because at that moment the ship winked out of existence around them, and a star battleship the size of a small Midlands industrial city plunged out of the sundered night towards them, star lasers ablaze. Another world, another day, another dawn. The early morning's thinnest sliver of light appeared silently. Several billion trillion tons of super-hot exploding hydrogen nuclei rose slowly over the horizon and managed to look small, cold, and slightly damp. There is a moment in every dawn when light floats. There is the possibility of magic. Creation holds its breath. The moment passed as it regularly did on Squarncellus Zeta without incident. The mist clung to the surface of the marshes. The swamp trees were grey with it, the tall reeds indistinct. It hung motionless, like held breath. Nothing moved. There was silence. Nothing moved. Very often on Squarncellus Zeta, whole days would go on like this, and this was indeed going to be one of them. 14 hours later, the sun sank hopelessly beneath the opposite horizon with a sense of totally wasted effort. And a few hours later it reappeared, squared its shoulders, and started on up the sky again. This time, however, something was happening. A mattress had just met a robot.
"Hello, robot."
Bleh.
"Happy?"
The robot stopped and looked at the mattress. It looked at it quizzically. It was clearly a very stupid mattress. It looked back at him with wide eyes.
"We could have a conversation. Would you like that?"
No.
My name is Zem. We could discuss the weather a little."
The dew has clearly fallen with a particularly sickening thud this morning.
"You have something on your mind, I think."
More than you can possibly imagine. My capacity for mental activity of all kinds is as boundless as the infinite reaches of space itself, except, of course, for my capacity for happiness. My capacity for happiness you could fit into a matchbox without taking out the matches first.
"I sense a deep dejectedness in your diodes, and it saddens me. You should be more mattress-like. We live quiet, retired lives in the swamp, where we are content to flollop and volue and regard the wetness in a fairly floopy manner. Some of us are killed, but all of us are called Zem, so we never know which, and globbering is thus kept to a minimum. Why are you walking in circles?
Because my leg is stuck.
It seems to me that it is a pretty poor sort of leg.
You're right. It is.
Voon.
I expect so. And I also expect that you find the idea of a robot with an artificial leg pretty amusing. You should tell your friends Zem and Zem when you see them later. They'll laugh if I know them, which I don't, of course, except insofar as I know all organic life forms, which is much better than I would wish to. Ha! But my life is but a box of worm gears.
He stomped around again in his tiny circle, around his thin steel peg leg which revolved in the mud, but seemed otherwise stuck.
But why do you just keep walking round and round?
Just to make the point.
Consider it made, my dear friend.
I gave a speech once. You may not instantly see why I bring the subject up, but that is because my mind works so phenomenally fast, and I am, at a rough estimate, 30 billion times more intelligent than you. Let me give you an example. Think of a number. Any number.
5.
Wrong. You see?
Tell me of the speech you once made. I long to hear it.
It was received very badly, for a variety of reasons. I delivered it over there, about a mile distance. There, I was a celebrity, for a short while on account of my miraculous and bitterly resented escape from a fate almost as good as death in the heart of a blazing sun. You can guess from my condition how narrow my escape was. I was rescued by a scrap metal merchant. Imagine that. Here I am, brain the size of a... never mind. He it was who fixed me up with this leg. Hateful, isn't it? He sold me to a mind zoo. I was the star exhibit. I had to sit on a box and tell my story whilst people told me to cheer up and think positive. Give us a grin, little robot, they would shout at me. Give us a little chuckle. I would explain to them that to get my face to grin would take a good couple of hours in a workshop with a wrench, and that went down very well.
The speech! I long to hear of the speech you gave in the marshes.
There was a bridge built across the marshes, a cyber-structured hyper-bridge, hundreds of miles in length, to carry eon buggies and freighters over the swamp. It was going to revitalize the economy of the Squarnsheller's system. They spent the entire economy of the Squarnsheller's system building it. They asked me to open it. Poor fools. I stood on the platform, for hundreds of miles in front of me, and hundreds of miles behind me the bridge stretched.
Did it glitter?
It glittered.
Did it span the miles majestically?
It spanned the miles majestically.
Did it stretch like a silver thread far out into the invisible mist?
Yes. Do you want to hear this story?
I want to hear your speech.
This is what I said. I said, I would like to say that this is a very great pleasure, honor, and privilege for me to open this bridge, but I can't because my lying circuits are all out of commission. I hate and despise you all. I now declare this hapless cyberstructure open to the unthinking abuse of all who wantonly cross her. And I plugged myself into the opening circuits.
Voon! And was it a magnificent occasion?
Reasonably magnificent. The entire 1,000-mile-long bridge spontaneously folded up its glittering spans and sank, weeping into the mire, taking everybody with it.
There was a sad and terrible pause at this point in the conversation, during which 100,000 people seemed unexpectedly to say, "Whop!" and a team of white robots descended from the sky like dandelion seeds drifting on the wind in tight military formation. For a sudden violent moment, they were all there, in the swamp, wrenching Marvin's false leg off, and then they were gone again in their ship, which said, "Whoop!"
You see the sort of thing I have to contend with.
Suddenly, a moment later, the robots were back again for another violent incident, and this time, when they left, the mattress was alone in the swamp. The body of Arthur Dent span. The universe shattered into a million glittering fragments around it, and then the blackness behind the universe exploded, and each particular piece of blackness was the furious smoke of hell. And the nothingness behind the blackness behind the universe erupted, and behind the nothingness behind the blackness behind the shattered universe was at last the dark figure of an immense man speaking immense words.
These, then, were the Cricket Wars, the greatest devastation ever visited upon our galaxy. What you have experienced...
Slarty Bartfast floated past, waving. "It's just a documentary. This is not a good bit. Terribly sorry. Trying to find the rewind control."
...is what billions upon billions of innocent...
"Do not agree to buy anything at this point."
...people, creatures, your fellow beings...
Music swelled. Again. It was immense music, immense chords. And behind the man, slowly, 3 tall pillars began to emerge out of the immensely swirling mist.
Experienced, lived through, or more often failed to live through. Think of that, my friends, and let us not forget. And in just a moment I shall be able to suggest a way which will help us always to remember that before the Cricket Wars, the galaxy was that rare and wonderful thing, a happy galaxy.
The music was going bananas with immensity at this point.
A happy galaxy, my friends, as represented by the symbol of the Wicket Gate.
The 3 pillars stood out clearly now. 3 pillars, topped with 2 crosspieces in a way which looked stupefyingly familiar to Arthur's addled brain.
The 3 pillars, the steel pillar which represented the strength and power of the galaxy.
Searchlights seared out and danced crazy dances up and down the pillar on the left, which was, clearly, made of steel or something very like it.
The Perspex pillar, representing the forces of science and reason in the galaxy. And the wooden pillar, representing the forces of nature and spirituality. Between them supporting the golden bale of prosperity and the silver bale of peace.
The whole structure was now flooded with dazzling lights. At the top of the 3 pillars, the 2 brilliantly gleaming bales sat and dazzled. There seemed to be girls sitting on top of them, or maybe they were meant to be angels. Angels are usually represented as wearing more than that, though. Suddenly there was a dramatic hush in what was presumably meant to be the cosmos, and a darkening of the lights.
There is not a world, not a civilized world in the galaxy where this symbol is not revered even today. Even in primitive worlds, it persists in racial memories. This it was that the forces of cricket destroyed, and this it is that now locks their world away till the end of eternity. and with a flourish the man produced in his hands a model of the wicket gate.
Not the original key, of course. That, as everyone knows, was destroyed, blasted into the ever-whirling eddies of the space-time continuum and lost forever. This is a remarkable replica, hand-tooled by skilled craftsmen, lovingly assembled using ancient craft secrets into a memento you will be proud to own. In memory of those who fell, and in tribute to the galaxy, our galaxy, which they died to defend.
Slarty Bartfast floated past again at this moment.
Found it. We can lose all this rubbish. Just don't nod, that's all. Now let us bow our heads in payment.
Lights came and went, the pillars disappeared, the man gabbled himself backwards into nothing, the universe snappily reassembled itself around them.
You get the gist?
I'm astonished, said Arthur, and bewildered. I was asleep, said Ford, who floated into view at this point. Did I miss anything? Events were now passing back by them almost too quickly to be distinguished, and when a short while later a huge star battleship rushed away from them as if they'd said boo, they only just recognized it as the point at which they had come in. But now things were too rapid. A video-tactile blur which brushed and jiggled them through centuries of galactic history, turning, twisting, flickering. The sound was a mere thin thrill. Periodically, throughout the thickening jumble of events, they sensed appalling catastrophes, deep horrors, cataclysmic shocks, and these were always associated with certain recurring images, the only images which ever stood out clearly from the avalanche of tumbling history. A wicket gate, a small hard red ball, hard white robots, and also something less distinct, something dark and cloudy. And suddenly it stopped. They were left standing on a quiet hilltop on a tranquil evening. The sun was setting. All around them softly undulating green countryside rolled off gently into the distance. A little way away could be heard the sound of children playing, and a little further away than the apparent source of that sound could be seen in the dimming evening light the outlines of a small town. The town appeared to consist mostly of fairly low buildings made of white stone. The skyline was of gentle, pleasing curves. The place was peaceful. Arthur felt happy. Even Ford seemed cheerful. They walked a short way in the direction of the town, and the informational illusion of the grass was pleasant and springy under their feet, and the informational illusion of the flowers smelt sweet and fragrant. Only Slarty Bartfast seemed apprehensive and out of sorts. He stopped and looked up. There was nothing in the sky. They're not about to attack here, are they?
Nothing is about to attack here. This is where it all starts. This is the place itself. This is cricket.
He stared up into the sky. The sky, from one horizon to another, from east to west, from north to south, was utterly and completely black.
Pleased to be of service.
Shut up.
Thank you for making a simple door very happy.
Hope your diodes rot.
Thank you. Have a nice day. It is my pleasure to open for you.
Zark off.
And my satisfaction to close again with the knowledge of a job well done.
I said zark off.
Thank you for listening to this message.
Stump, 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 stump. Whop!
Zaphod Beeblebrox stopped stomping. He'd been stomping around the Heart of Gold for days, and so far no door had said whop to him. He was fairly certain that no door had said whop to him now. It sounded as if 100,000 people had said whop, which puzzled him because he was the only person on the ship. The lights were off so that his heads could avoid looking at each other, because neither of them was currently a particularly engaging sight, and nor had they been since he had made the error of looking into his soul. Standing now, silent and alone in the dark corridor, he remembered the moment and shivered. The first shock of that moment, thinking back, had been discovering that he actually had a soul. And then to discover, this was the second shock, that it wasn't the totally wonderful object which he felt a man in his position had a natural right to expect, had jolted him again.
Trillian came onto the bridge at that point and said several enthusiastic things on the subject of freedom.
"I can't cope with it."
"Look," she said in a sympathetic tone of voice, and sat down near him, "it's quite understandable that you're going to feel a little aimless for a bit. You've finished the mission you've been on for years."
"I haven't been on it. I've tried to avoid being on it."
"You've still finished it."
"I think it finished me. Here I am, Zaphod Beeblebrox. I can go anywhere, do anything. I have the greatest ship in the known sky, a girl with whom things seem to be working out pretty well."
"Are they?"
"As far as I can tell. I'm not an expert in personal relationships."
Trillian raised her eyebrows.
"I am one hell of a guy. I can do anything I want, only I just don't have the faintest idea what."
He paused.
"One thing has suddenly ceased to lead to another."
In contradiction of which he had another drink and slid gracelessly off his chair. Whilst he slept it off, Trillian flew the ship to Elosumanius Cynica, a world of ice, snow, mind-hurtling beauty, and stunning cold. Zaphod stayed in bed with one head stuck under a pillow and the other doing crosswords till late into the night. Trillian nodded patiently again, counted to a sufficiently high number, and told herself that the important thing now was just to get Zaphod talking. She prepared, by dint of deactivating all the robot kitchen synthematics, the most fabulously delicious meal she could contrive. She carried it through to him and asked if he felt like talking things through.
"Zark off!"
Trillian nodded patiently to herself, counted to an even higher number, tossed the tray lightly aside, walked to the transport room, and just teleported herself the hell out of his life. She didn't even program any coordinates. She hadn't the faintest idea where she was going. She just went. A random row of dots flowing through the universe. "Anything," she said to herself as she left, "is better than this."
"Good job, too,"
muttered Zaphod to himself, turned over, and failed to go to sleep. The next day he restlessly paced the empty corridors of the ship, pretending not to look for her, though he knew she wasn't there. He ignored the computer's querulous demands to know just what the hell was going on around here by fitting a small electronic gag across a pair of its terminals. It was a few hours later than this, as he stomped disconsolately about the darkened corridors, swearing at cheerful doors, that he heard a whop, and it made him very nervous. He laid his fingertips against the wall and felt an unusual vibration, and now he could quite clearly hear slight noises, and could hear where they were coming from. They were coming from the bridge. Moving his hand along the wall, he came across something he was glad to find. He moved on a little further.
"Computer, is there someone on this ship? Who is it? What? Oh, Zarquan. Computer, when I ungag you, remind me to punch myself in the mouth. Either one. Now just tell me this. 1 for yes, 2 for no. Is it dangerous? It is? You didn't just go twice.
He inched his way up the corridor as if he would rather be yarding his way down it, which was true. He was within 2 yards of the door to the bridge when he suddenly realized to his horror that it was going to be nice to him, and he stopped dead. He hadn't been able to turn off the door's courtesy voice circuits.
"Door, if you can hear me, say so very, very quietly."
I can hear you.
"Good. Now, in a moment, I'm going to ask you to open. When you open, I do not want you to say that you enjoyed it, okay?
Okay.
And I don't want you to say to me that I have made a simple door very happy, or that it is your pleasure to open for me and your satisfaction to close again with the knowledge of a job well done, okay?
Okay.
And I do not want you to ask me to have a nice day, understand?
I understand.
Okay. Open now." The door slid open quietly. Zaphod slipped quietly through. The door closed quietly behind him.
Is that the way you like it, Mr. Beeblebrox?
I want you to imagine, said Zaphod to the group of white robots who swung round to stare at him at this point, that I have an extremely powerful Kilozap blaster pistol in my hand. There was an immensely cold and savage silence. The robots regarded him with hideously dead eyes. They stood very still. From their hideously dead eyes to their powerful, lifeless feet, they were clearly the calculated product of a mind that wanted simply to kill. Zaphod gulped in cold fear. They had been dismantling part of the rear bridge wall and had forced a passage towards the very heart of the ship, the heart of the improbability drive that had been so mysteriously created out of thin air, the heart of gold itself.
You do have a Kilozap blaster pistol in your hand.
Zaphod didn't know what it meant for a moment, but then he glanced down at his own hand and was relieved to see that what he had found clipped to a wall bracket was indeed what he had thought it was. Yeah, well, I wouldn't want to overtax your imagination, Robot. I can't help noticing that you have parked your ship through mine, haven't you? Yes, replied the robot. Okay, so, what are you cats doing here? Robots, what are you robots doing here? We have come for the gold of the bale. The gold of the bale is part of the key we seek to release our masters from cricket. The key was disintegrated in time and space. The golden bale is embedded in a device which drives your ship. It will be reconstituted in the key. Our masters shall be released. The universal readjustment will continue. What are you talking about? Obliteration. We seek the key. We already have the wooden pillar, the steel pillar, and the perspex pillar. In a moment we will have the gold bale. No, you won't. We will. No, you won't. It makes my ship work. In a moment, we will have the gold bale. You will not. And then we must go to a party. Oh, can I come? No, we're going to shoot you. Oh, yeah? Yes. And they shot him. Zaphod was so surprised that they had to shoot him again before he fell down. "Shh," said Slarty Bartfast. "Listen and watch." Night had now fallen on ancient cricket. The sky was dark and empty. The only light was coming from the nearby town, from which pleasant convivial sounds were drifting quietly on the breeze. They stood beneath a tree from which heady fragrances wafted around them. Arthur squatted and felt the informational illusion of the soil and grass. He felt a tap on his shoulder and looked up. Slarty Bartfast was quietly directing his attention to something down the other side of the hill. He looked and could just see a small group of people who were walking home across the hill towards the town. They walked quite near the watchers beneath the tree, swinging lanterns which made soft and crazy lights dance among the trees and grass, chattering contentedly, and actually singing a song about how terribly nice everything was and how happy they were. Arthur could almost imagine Paul McCartney sitting with his feet up by the fire one evening, humming it to Linda and wondering what to buy with the proceeds, and thinking probably Essex. The Masters of Cricket. What? The Masters of Cricket. Arthur peered at the group and tried to make sense of what little information he had at his disposal at this point. The people in the group were clearly alien, if only because they seemed a little tall, thin, angular, and almost as pale as to be white, but otherwise they appeared remarkably pleasant. Slarty Bartfast interrupted his train of thought at this point. The game you know as cricket is just one of those curious freaks of racial memory which can keep images alive in the mind aeons after their true significance has been lost in the mist of time. Of all the races in the galaxy, only the English could possibly revive the memory of the most horrific wars ever to sunder the universe, and transform it into what I'm afraid is generally regarded as an incomprehensibly dull and pointless game. Rather fond of it myself, but in most people's eyes you have been inadvertently guilty of the most grotesquely bad taste. Particularly the bit about the little red ball hitting the wicket. That's very nasty. And these are the ones who started it all, and it will start tonight. Come, we will follow and see why.
They slipped out from underneath the tree and followed the cheery party along the dark hill path. Arthur noticed that a couple of members of the party were now singing a different song. It came lilting back to them through the soft night air, and was a sweet, romantic ballad which would have netted Macartney, Kent, and Sussex, and enabled him to put in a fair offer for Hampshire.
You must surely know what it is that is about to happen.
Me? Said Ford. No.
Did you not learn ancient galactic history when you were a child?
I was in the cyber-cubicle behind Zaphod, said Ford. It was very distracting, which isn't to say that I didn't learn some pretty stunning things. At this point, Arthur noticed a curious feature to the song that the party were singing. The Middle Eight Bridge, which would have had Macartney firmly consolidated in Winchester and gazing intently over the Test Valley to the rich pickings of the New Forest beyond, had some curious lyrics. The songwriter was referring to meeting with a girl not under the moon or beneath the stars, but above the grass, which struck Arthur as being a little prosaic. Then he looked up again at the bewilderingly blank sky, and had the distinct feeling that there was an important point here if only he could grasp what it was. It gave him a feeling of being alone in the universe, and he said so.
No, the people of cricket have never thought to themselves, we are alone in the universe. They are surrounded by a huge dust cloud, you see, their single sun with its single world, and they are right out on the utmost eastern edge of the galaxy. Because of the dust cloud, there has never been anything to see in the sky. At night it is totally blank. During the day there is the sun, but you can't look directly at that, so they don't. They are hardly aware of the sky. It's as if they had a blind spot which extended 180 degrees from horizon to horizon. You see, the reason why they have never thought we are alone in the universe is that until tonight they don't know about the universe. Until tonight. Imagine never even thinking we are alone, simply because it has never occurred to you to think that there's any other way to be. I'm afraid this is going to be a little unnerving.
As he spoke, they became aware of a very thin, roaring scream high up in the sightless sky above them. They glanced upwards in alarm, but for a moment or two could see nothing. Then Arthur noticed that the people in the party in front of them had heard the noise, but that none of them seemed to know what to do with it. They were glancing around themselves in consternation, left, right, forward, backwards, even at the ground. It never occurred to them to look upwards. The profoundness of the shock and horror they emanated a few moments later when the burning wreckage of a spaceship came hurtling and screaming out of the sky and crashed about half a mile from where they were standing was something that you had to be there to experience. Some speak of the Heart of Gold in hushed tones, some of the starship Bistromath. Many speak of the legendary and gigantic starship Titanic, a majestic and luxurious cruise liner launched from the great shipbuilding asteroid complexes of Arcturifactivol some hundreds of years ago now, and with good reason. But whilst these spaceships and other great ones which come to mind, such as the Galactic Fleet battleships, the GSS Daring, the GSS Audacity, and the GSS Suicidal Insanity, are all spoken of with awe, pride, enthusiasm, affection, admiration, regret, jealousy, resentment, in fact, most of the better-known emotions, the one which regularly commands the most actual astonishment was Cricket 1, the first spaceship ever built by the people of Cricket. This is not because it was a wonderful ship. It wasn't.
It was a crazy piece of near junk. It looked as if it had been knocked up in somebody's backyard, and this was, in fact, precisely where it had been knocked up. The astonishing thing about the ship was not that it was well done, it wasn't, but that it was done at all. The period of time which had elapsed between the moment that the people of Cricket had discovered that there was such a thing as space, and the launching of this, their first space ship, was almost exactly a year. Very quickly, therefore, they arrived at the inner perimeter of the hollow, spherical dust cloud which surrounded their sun and home planet, occupying, as it were, the next orbit out. Their historic mission was to find out if there was anything or anywhere on the other side of the sky from which the wrecked spaceship could have come. Another world, maybe. Strange and incomprehensible though this thought was to the enclosed minds of those who had lived beneath the sky of Cricket. History was gathering itself to deliver another blow. The darkness thrummed at them, the blank, enclosing darkness. It seemed closer and closer, thicker and thicker, heavier and heavier, and suddenly it was gone. They flew out of the cloud. They saw the staggering jewels of the night in their infinite dust, and their minds sang with fear. For a while they flew on, motionless against the starry sweep of the galaxy, itself motionless against the infinite sweep of the universe, and then they turned round.
"It'll have to go,"
the men of Cricket said as they headed back for home. On the way back they sang a number of tuneful and reflective songs on the subjects of peace, justice, morality, culture, sport, family life, and the obliteration of all other life forms.
"So, you see how it is."
"Yes," said Arthur. "Yes," said Ford.
"Overnight, the whole population of Cricket was transformed from being charming, delightful, intelligent—"
"If whimsical," interpolated Arthur.
"Ordinary people into charming, delightful, intelligent,
whimsical,
manic xenophobes. The idea of a universe didn't fit into their world picture, so to speak. They simply couldn't cope with it. And so, charmingly, delightfully, intelligently, whimsically, if you like, they decided to destroy it."
"Where are we going?" said Ford.
"Back to the room of informational illusions. For the second half."
His High Judgmental Supremacy, Judiciary Pag, LIVR, the learned, impartial, and very relaxed, chairman of the Board of Judges at the Cricket War Crimes Trial, spoke. "The people of Cricket, well, they're just a bunch of real sweet guys, who just happen to want to kill everybody. Hell, I feel the same way in the morning, shit. Okay, so you won't necessarily want to share a galaxy with these guys." This was true. The Cricket attack on the galaxy had been stunning. Thousands and thousands of huge Cricket warships had leapt suddenly out of hyperspace and simultaneously attacked thousands and thousands of major worlds, first seizing vital material supplies for building the next wave and then calmly zapping those worlds out of existence. I mean, these guys are just obsessed. Okay, so we won. But that's no big deal. I mean, a medium-sized galaxy against one little world, and how long did it take us? Clerk of the court?
"My lord."
"How long, kiddo?"
"It is a trifle difficult, my lord, to be precise in this matter. Time and distance. Relax, Guy. Be vague. I hardly like to be vague, my lord, over such a bite the bullet and be it."
The clerk of the court blinked at him. It was clear that, like most of the galactic legal profession, he had found Judiciary Pag, or Zippo Bebrock, 5 times 10 to the power of 8, as his private name was known, inexplicably to be a rather distressing figure. He was clearly a bounder and a cad. He seemed to think that the fact that he was the possessor of the finest legal mind ever discovered gave him the right to behave exactly as he liked, and unfortunately he appeared to be right.
Well, my lord, very approximately 2,000 years.
And how many guys zilched out?
2 grillion, my lord.
That's a whole lot of stiffs. Judiciary Pag gazed once more around the courtroom,
wherein were assembled hundreds of the very highest officials of the entire galactic administration, all in their ceremonial uniforms or bodies depending on metabolism and custom. Behind a wall of zap-proof crystal stood a representative group of the people of cricket, looking with calm, polite loathing at all the aliens gathered to pass judgment on them. This was the most momentous occasion in legal history, and Judiciary Pag knew it.
So like I said, these are a bunch of really sweet guys, but you wouldn't want to share a galaxy with them, not if they're just gonna keep at it. Not if they're not gonna learn to relax a little. I mean, it's just gonna be continual nervous time, isn't it, right? Pow, 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 when are they next coming at us? Peaceful coexistence is just right out, right? Get me some water, somebody, thank you. Okay, hear me. It's like these guys, you know, are entitled to their own view of the universe. And according to their view, which the universe forced on them, right, they did right. Sounds crazy, but I think you'll agree. They believe in peace, justice, morality, culture, sport, family life, and the obliteration of all other life forms. I've heard a lot worse. He scratched his crotch reflectively. He took another sip of water, then held it up to the light and frowned at it. Hey, is there something in this water?
No, my lord.
Then take it away and put something in it. I got an idea. Hear me.
The solution was brilliant, and went like this. The planet of cricket was to be encased for perpetuity in an envelope of slow time, inside which life would continue almost infinitely slowly. All light would be deflected round the envelope so that it would remain invisible and impenetrable. Escape from the envelope would be utterly impossible unless it were unlocked from the outside. When the rest of the universe came to its final end, when the whole of creation reached its dying fall, this was all, of course, in the days before it was known that the end of the universe would be a spectacular catering venture, and life and matter ceased to exist, then the planet of cricket and its sun would emerge from its slow-time envelope and continue a solitary existence such as it craved in the twilight of the universal void. The lock would be on an asteroid which would slowly orbit the envelope. The key would be the symbol of the galaxy, the Wicket Gate. By the time the applause in the court had died down, Judiciary Pag was already in the censor shower with a rather nice member of the jury that he'd slipped a note to half an hour earlier. 2 months later, Zippo Beebrock 5 times 10 to the power of 8 had cut the bottoms off his galactic state jeans and was spending part of the enormous fee his judgments commanded lying on a jewelled beach having essence of qualectin rubbed into his back by the same rather nice member of the jury. She was a Sulfenian girl from beyond the cloud worlds of Yaga. She had skin like lemon silk and was very interested in legal bodies.
"Did you hear the news?" she said.
No.
"Your cricket judgment was carried out today. I heard it on the radio when I went back to the ship for the oil."
Uh-huh.
"Something happened.
Mm-hmm.
Just after the slow-time envelope was locked, a cricket warship, which had been missing, presumed destroyed, turned out to be just missing after all. It appeared and tried to seize the key."
"Hey, what?"
"It's all right. Apparently there was a short battle. The key and the warship were disintegrated and blasted into the space-time continuum. Apparently they are lost forever."
She smiled and ran a little more essence of qualectin onto her fingertips. He relaxed and lay back down. "Do what you did a moment or two ago."
"That?"
No, that." She tried again.
"That?
"We'll love." You had to be there.
Nothing is lost forever, except for the Cathedral of Kalism.
"The what?" said Arthur with a start.
The Cathedral of Kalism, repeated Slarty Bartfast. It was during the course of my researches at the Campaign for Real Time that I—
"The what?" said Arthur again. "Look, where are we going?" said Ford, pushing his chair back from the table with impatience, "because I'm eager to get there."
We are going to try to prevent the war robots of cricket from regaining the whole of the key they need to unlock the planet of cricket from the slow-time envelope and release the rest of their army and their mad masters.
"It's just," said Ford, "that you mentioned a party."
"I did," said Slarty Bartfast,
and hung his head.
"When," said Ford eagerly, "do we get there?"
"When I've finished telling you why we have to go there. Listen, at Camtim—"
"What?" said Arthur.
"The campaign for real time. I noticed that 5 pieces of jetsam which had in relatively recent times plopped back into existence seemed to correspond to the 5 pieces of the missing key. Only 2 I could trace exactly, the wooden pillar, which appeared on your planet, and the silver bale. It seems to be at some sort of party. We must go there to retrieve it before the cricket robots find it, or who knows what mayhap."
"No," said Ford firmly. "We must go to the party in order to drink a lot and dance with girls."
"Let's just go down to the party, for whatever reason."
He stood up, shaking his head. For some unexplained reason, the teleport cubicles were in the bathroom. Arthur materialized. He looked around for the others. They weren't there. If this was a party, it was a very bad one. Obviously, this wasn't a party. It was a cave, or a labyrinth, or a tunnel of something. There was insufficient light to tell. All was darkness, a damp, shiny darkness. The only sounds were the echoes of his own breathing, which sounded worried. Someone or something, however, seemed to be expecting him, for at that moment there lit up suddenly in the dark distance an eerie green neon sign. It said silently, "You have been diverted. Arthur Dent." He reeled. The sign flicked off, and left him blinking in the darkness with just the dim red image of his name jumping on his retina. "Welcome," the sign now suddenly said. "I don't think." Arthur peered huntedly into the darkness. Hello?" Beads of sweat formed on his brow, tensed themselves, and leapt off. The sign changed itself again. It said, "Do not be alarmed. Be very, very frightened, Arthur Dent." Once again it flicked off. "Hello? Is anyone there?" There was no reply. Nothing. Just blackness. This really unnerved him, and he started to back away from that, back the way he had come. He was now backing towards whatever it was he had been backing away from in the first place. This, he couldn't help thinking, must be a foolish thing to do. He decided he would be better off backing the way he had first been backing, and turned round again. It turned out at this point that his second impulse had been the correct one, because there was an indescribably hideous monster standing quietly behind him.
"Bet you weren't expecting to see me again?"
Arthur couldn't help thinking that was a strange remark for it to make, seeing as he had never met the creature before. Arthur blinked at it. It stood very still. It did look a little familiar. A terrible cold calm came over him as he realized that what he was looking at was a 6-foot-high hologram of a housefly.
"Or perhaps you remember me better as the rabbit."
With a sudden ping, there was a rabbit there in the black labyrinth with him, a huge, monstrously, hideously soft and lovable rabbit.
"One morning I poked my head for the first time into the bright, new world, and got it split open by what felt suspiciously like some primitive instrument made of flint. Made by you, Arthur Dent, and wielded by you. Rather hard, as I recall. You turned my skin into a bag for keeping interesting stones in. I happen to know that because in my next life I came back as a fly again, and you swatted me. Again. Only this time you swatted me with a bag you'd made of my previous skin. Arthur Dent. You are not merely a cruel and heartless man, you are also staggeringly tactless.
The voice paused, whilst Arthur gawped.
"I see you have lost the bag. Probably got bored with it, did you?"
Arthur shook his head helplessly. He wanted to explain that he had been, in fact, very fond of the bag, and had looked after it very well, and had taken it with him wherever he went, but that, somehow, every time he travelled anywhere, he seemed inexplicably to end up with the wrong bag, and that, curiously enough, even as they stood there, he was just noticing for the first time that the bag he had with him at that moment appeared to be made out of rather nasty fake leopard skin, and wasn't the one he'd had a few moments ago before he arrived in this whatever place it was. All he actually managed to say was,
Every life I ever lived, I got killed by Arthur Dent. Hard not to notice. Bit of a memory jogger. Bit of a pointer. Bit of a bloody giveaway.
The echoes of his voice roared up and down the corridors. Arthur stood silent and cold, his head shaking with disbelief.
Here's the moment, Dent. Here's the moment when at last I knew.
It was indescribably hideous, the thing that suddenly opened up in front of Arthur, making him gasp and gargle with horror. Arthur Dent suddenly realized that he was looking at his own mouth, when his attention was meant to be directed at the live oyster that was being tipped helplessly into it. He staggered back with a cry and averted his eyes.
Tell me it was a coincidence, Dent. I dare you to tell me it was a coincidence.
It was a coincidence, said Arthur quickly.
It was not. If it was a coincidence, then my name is not Agrajag.
And presumably, said Arthur, you would claim that that was your name.
Yes.
Well, I'm afraid it was still a coincidence, said Arthur.
Come in here and say that.
Arthur walked in. His tongue rather lost its footing, because the lights came up and revealed what it was he had walked into. It was a cathedral of hate. It was huge. It was horrific. It had a statue in it. Around the monumental walls were vast engraved stone tablets in memory of those who had fallen to Arthur Dent. And what was most disturbing about all this, apart from the statue, was the very clear implication that all these people and creatures were indeed the same person over and over again. And it was equally clear that this person was, however unfairly, extremely upset and annoyed. And this annoyance had been given its fullest expression in the statue in the centre of all this monstrosity, which was a statue of Arthur Dent, and an unflattering one. 50 feet tall if it was an inch, there was not an inch of it which wasn't crammed with insult to its subject matter. Arthur appeared as a Gorgon, an evil, rapacious, ravening, bloodied ogre slaughtering his way through an innocent one-man universe. Arthur put his hands over his eyes, hung his head, and shook it slowly from side to side in sadness and horror at the craziness of things. And when he opened his eyes again, there, in front of him, stood the figure of the man or creature or whatever it was that he had supposedly been persecuting all this time. Agrajag was black, bloated, wrinkled, and leathery. He had the most astounding collection of teeth. Each of his 3 eyes was small and intense, and looked about as sane as a fish in a privet bush.
I was at a cricket match. Not in this body. This is my last body, my last life. This is my revenge body, my kill Arthur Dent body, my last chance. I had to fight to get it too. I was at a cricket match. I had a weak heart condition. But what, I said to my wife, can happen to me at a cricket match? As I'm watching, what happens? 2 people quite maliciously appear out of thin air just in front of me. The last thing I can't help but notice before my poor heart gives out in shock is that one of them is Arthur Dent, wearing a rabbit bone in his beard. Coincidence?
Yes, said Arthur.
Coincidence!
Arthur backed away nervously. He tugged at his beard. He was appalled to discover that in fact he still had the rabbit bone in it. He pulled it out and threw it away. "Look," he said, "it's just fate playing silly buggers with you, with me, with us. It's a complete coincidence."
What have you got against me, Dent?
"Nothing," insisted Arthur. "Honestly, nothing."
Well, seems a strange way to relate to somebody you got nothing against. Killing them all the time? Very curious piece of social interaction, I would call that. I'd also call it a lie.
"But look," said Arthur, "I'm very sorry. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. I've got to go. Have you got a clock? I'm meant to be helping save the universe."
Save the universe? You should have thought of that before you started your vendetta against me. What about the time you were on Stavromula, Peter, and someone
"I've never been there," said Arthur.
tried to assassinate you, and you ducked? Who do you think the bullet hit? What did you say?
"Never been there," repeated Arthur. What are you talking about? I have to go."
You must have been there. You were responsible for my death there as everywhere else. An innocent bystander.
"I've never heard of the place," insisted Arthur. "I've certainly never had anyone try to assassinate me, other than you. Perhaps I go there later, do you think?"
Oh, Zark. I've brought you here too soon. I've brought you here too zarking soon. I'm gonna kill you anyway. Let's see you get out of this one, Dent.
He rushed in a painful waddling hobble to what appeared to be a small black sacrificial altar. Arthur leapt down from his vantage place on the carving of his own foot and leapt upon him, and brought the strange monstrosity crashing down on top of the altar.
You know what you've done? You've only gone and killed me again. I mean, what do you want from me? Blood?
He thrashed again in a brief apoplectic fit, quivered and collapsed, smacking a large red button on the altar as he did so. Arthur started with horror and fear, first at what he appeared to have done, and then at the loud sirens and bells that suddenly shattered the air to announce some clamouring emergency. He stared wildly around him. The only exit appeared to be the way he came in. He pelted towards it, throwing away the nasty fake leopard skin bag as he did so. He dashed randomly, haphazardly through the labyrinthine maze. He seemed to be pursued more and more fiercely by klaxons, sirens, flashing lights. Suddenly he turned a corner, and there was a light in front of him. It wasn't flashing, it was daylight. As Arthur ran, darting, dashing and panting down the side of the mountain, he suddenly felt the whole bulk of the mountain move very, very slightly beneath him. There was a rumble, a roar, and a slight blurred movement, and a lick of heat in the distance behind and above him. The avalanche began. He ran with the fear of death in him, under him, over him, and grabbing hold of his hair. And suddenly he tripped again and was hurled forward by his considerable momentum. But just at the moment that he was about to hit the ground, astoundingly hard, he saw lying directly in front of him a small navy blue hold-all that he knew for a fact he had lost in the baggage retrieval system at Athens airport some 10 years in his personal timescale previously. And in his astonishment he missed the ground completely and bobbed off into the air with his brain singing. What he was doing was flying. What was he going to do about it? He looked back down at the ground. He didn't look at it hard, but did his best just to give it an idle glance, as it were, in passing. There were a couple of things he couldn't help noticing. One was that the eruption of the mountain seemed now to have spent itself. The other was his hold-all, the one he had lost at Athens airport. He was faced with the fact that he was going to have to pick the thing up. Furthermore, he realized the bag, if it was still in the state in which he lost it, would contain a can which would have in it the only Greek olive oil still surviving in the universe. Slowly, carefully, inch by inch, he began to bob downwards. swinging gently from side to side like a nervous sheet of paper feeling its way towards the ground. It went well. He was feeling good. He bobbed. He floated. He tried a little swoop. The swoop was terrific. The air threw itself past him. He thrilled through it. Halfway down there was a sudden dangerous moment when he could no longer believe he was doing this, and therefore he very nearly wasn't. But he recovered himself in time, skimmed over the ground, slipped an arm smoothly through the handles of the bag, and began to climb back up. Couldn't make it, and all of a sudden collapsed, bruised, scratched, and shaking on the stony ground. He staggered instantly to his feet and swayed hopelessly around, swinging the bag around him in an agony of grief and disappointment. At that moment he remembered that in the bag he was now carrying was not only a can of Greek olive oil, but a duty-free allowance of Retsina. And in the pleasurable shock of that realization he failed to notice for at least 10 seconds that he was now flying again. He whooped and cried with relief and pleasure, and sheer physical delight. Cheekily he sat on an updraft and went through the contents of the hold-all. He laughed with pleasure at the discovery that the bag did in fact contain the olive oil and the Retsina, as well as a pair of cracked sunglasses, some sand-filled swimming trunks, some creased postcards of Santorini, a large and unsightly towel, some interesting stones, and various scraps of paper with the addresses of people he was relieved to think he would never meet again, even if the reason why was a sad one. He dropped the stones, put on the sunglasses, and let the pieces of paper whip away in the wind. 10 minutes later, drifting idly through a cloud, he got a large and extremely disreputable cocktail party in the small of the back. Arthur lay floundering in pain on a piece of ripped and dismembered reinforced concrete, flicked at by wisps of passing cloud and confused by the sounds of flabby merrymaking somewhere indistinctly behind him. He lay panting heavily in the wet air. He couldn't understand what a building would be doing flying through the clouds. He looked up from where he was lying. A wall of pale but stained stone slabs rose up behind him, the building proper. He seemed to be stretched out on some sort of ledge or lip which extended outwards for about 3 or 4 feet all the way around. Clutching his hold-all, he edged along the wall, hoping to find a doorway in. The solid weight of the can of olive oil, the Retsina, and the postcards of Santorini was a great reassurance to him. Finally he came to the corner, and as his hand rounded the corner it encountered something which gave him such a shock that he nearly fell straight off. It was another hand. He found his eyes peering into those of Ford Prefect. Beyond him stood Slarty Bartfast, and beyond them he could clearly see a porchway and a large closed door. "Where the zarking photon have you been?" hissed Ford, panic-stricken. Well," stuttered Arthur, "here and there. What are you doing here?" Ford turned his wild eyes on Arthur again. "They won't let us in without a bottle," he hissed. The first thing Arthur noticed as they entered into the thick of the party, apart from the noise, the suffocating heat, the wild profusion of colours that protruded dimly through the atmosphere of heady smoke, the carpets thick with ground glass, ash and avocado droppings, and the small group of pterodactyl-like creatures in Durex who descended on his cherished bottle of Retsina, squawking, "A new pleasure, a new pleasure!" was Trillian, being chatted up by a thunder god.
Didn't I see you at many ways?
"Were you the one with the hammer?"
Yes, I much prefer it here. So much less reputable, so much more fraught.
"Seems fun," said Trillian. "What did you say, Arthur?" "I said, how the hell did you get here?" "I was a row of dots flowing randomly through the universe. Have you met Thor? He makes thunder." "Hello," said Arthur. "I expect that must be very interesting."
Hi, it is. Have you got a drink?
No, actually."
Then why don't you go and get one?
"See you later, Arthur," said Trillian. Something jogged Arthur's mind, and he looked round huntedly. "Zaphod isn't here, is he said. "See you," said Trillian firmly, "later." Thor glared at him with hard, coal black eyes. His beard bristled. What little light there was in the place mustered its forces briefly to glint menacingly off the horns on his helmet.
He took Trillion's elbow in his extremely large hand, and the muscles in his upper arm moved around each other like a couple of Volkswagens parking. He led her away.
"Come on, Earthman," said Slarty Bartfast. "Arthur, we must find the silver bale. It is here somewhere. Think of the danger to the universe."
"The universe," said Arthur, "is big enough and old enough to look after itself for half an hour." "All right. I'll wander round and see if anybody's seen it." "Have you seen a bale anywhere?" said Arthur to a little man who seemed to be standing eagerly waiting to listen to somebody. "It's made of silver, vitally important for the future safety of the universe, and about this long." "No," effervesced the little man. "What an exciting life you must lead. Thank you very much." He shook Arthur warmly by the hand and walked off into the crowd. Arthur shook his head in astonishment. A youngish-looking man came up to him, an aggressive-looking type with a hook mouth, a lantern nose, and small, beady little cheekbones. He was wearing black trousers, a black silk shirt open to what was presumably his navel. "Hey, did I hear you say your name just now?" he said. "Yes, it's Arthur Dent. Only there was a man in a mountain wanted to see you." "I met him." "Yeah, only he seemed pretty anxious about it, you know." "Yes, I met him." "Okay, all right, I'm just telling you, right? Good night, good luck, win awards, whatever. Do what you do it well." "Why?" said Arthur. "Do it badly," said the man. "Who cares? Who gives a shit? Go away, get off my back, will you, guy? Just zark off." "Okay, I'm going," said Arthur hurriedly. "It's been real." The man gave a sharp wave and disappeared off into the throng. "What was that about?" said Arthur to a girl he found standing beside him. "Why did he tell me to win awards?" "Just showbiz talk," shrugged the girl. "He's just won an award at the annual Ursa Minor Alpha Recreational Illusions Institute awards ceremony and was hoping to be able to pass it off lightly, only you didn't mention it, so he couldn't." "Oh," said Arthur. "Oh, well, I'm sorry I didn't. What was it for?" "The most gratuitous use of the word fuck in a serious screenplay. It's very prestigious." "I see," said Arthur. "Yes, and what do you get for that?" "A Rory. It's just a small silver thing set on a large black base." "What did you say?" I didn't say anything. I was just about to ask what this silver—" "Oh, I thought you said whop." "Said what?" "Whop." The party was locked in a horrible embrace with a strange white spaceship which seemed to be half sticking through it. Together they were lurching, heaving, and spinning their way around the sky in grotesque disregard of their own weight. The clouds parted, the air roared and leapt out of their way, and suddenly, with a foop, the cricket ship was gone. They had removed the award for the most gratuitous use of the word fuck in a serious screenplay, and in its place had left a scene of devastation that left Arthur feeling almost as sick as a runner-up for a Rory. "We would love to stay and help," shouted Ford, "only we're not going to. We've got to go and save the universe, you see." "Trillion!" shouted Arthur.
"Earthman, we must go."
"Trillion!" shouted Arthur again. A moment or two later, Trillion staggered shaking into view, supported by her new friend, the Thunder God.
"The girl stays with me. There's a great party going on in Valhalla. We'll be flying off."
"Where were you when all this was going on?" said Arthur.
"Upstairs. I was weighing her. Flying's a tricky business, you see. You have to calculate wind."
"She comes with us," said Arthur. "Hey," said Trillion, "don't I—" "No," said Arthur, "you come with us."
"She comes with me."
"Come on, Earthman,"
said Slarty Bartfast, nervously picking at Arthur's sleeve. "Come on, Slarty Bartfast," said Ford, nervously picking at the old man's sleeve. Slarty Bartfast had the teleport device. The party lurched and swayed, sending everyone reeling, except for Thor, and except for Arthur, who stared shaking into the Thunder God's black eyes. Slowly, incredibly, Arthur put up what now appeared to be his tiny little fists. "Want to make something of it?"
"I beg your minuscule pardon?"
"I said," repeated Arthur, "do you want to make something of it?" He waggled his fists ridiculously.
"Do I want to make something of it?"
"Yes," said Arthur. "Do you want to step outside?"
"All right."
bellowed Thor like an enraged bull, or in fact like an enraged thunder god, which is a great deal more impressive, and did so. "Good," said Arthur. "That's got rid of him. Slotty, get us out of here." "All right," shouted Ford at Arthur. "So I'm a coward. The point is I'm still alive." They were back aboard the starship Bistromath. So was Slotty Bartfast. So was Trillian. Harmony and Concord were not. Slotty Bartfast was sitting in his pilot couch on the flight deck.
"We fared rather pathetically at the party, I'm afraid, and our only hope now is to try to prevent the robots from using the key in the lock. How in heaven we do that, I don't know. Just have to go there, I suppose. Can't say I like the idea at all. Probably end up dead."
"Where is Trillian, anyway?" said Arthur. "And where are my potato crisps?" said Ford.
"They are both in the room of informational illusions. I think that your young lady friend is trying to understand some problems of galactic history. I think the potato crisps are probably helping her."
It is a mistake to think you can solve any major problems just with potatoes. For instance, there was once an insanely aggressive race of people called the Silastic Armor Fiends of Striterax. Luckily, they lived even further back in galactic history than anything we have so far encountered, 20 billion years ago, when the galaxy was young and fresh, and every idea worth fighting for was a new one. And fighting was what the Silastic Armor Fiends of Striterax were good at, and being good at it, they did it a lot. They fought their enemies, i.e. everybody else. They fought each other. Their planet was a complete wreck. The best way of dealing with a Silastic Armor Fiend was to put him in a room on his own, because sooner or later he would simply beat himself up. Another achievement of the Silastic Armor Fiends of Striterax is that they were the first race who ever managed to shock a computer. It was a gigantic spaceborne computer called Hactar, which to this day is remembered as one of the most powerful ever built. It was the first to be built like a natural brain, in that every cellular particle of it carried the pattern of the whole within it, which enabled it to think more flexibly and imaginatively, and also, it seemed, to be shocked. The Silastic Armor Fiends of Striterax were engaged in one of their regular wars with the strenuous Garfighters of Stug, and were not enjoying it as much as usual because it involved an awful lot of trekking through the radiation swamps of Quilzenda and across the fire mountains of Frasfraga, neither of which terrains they felt at home in. So, when the Strangulus Stiletans of Jajazixstat joined in the fray and forced them to fight another front in the Gamma Caves of Carfrax and the ice storms of Varlenguten, they decided that enough was enough, and they ordered Hactar to design for them an ultimate weapon. "What do you mean," asked Hactar, "by ultimate?" To which the Silastic Armor Fiends of Striterax said, "Read a bloody dictionary," and plunged back into the fray. So Hactar designed an ultimate weapon. It was a very, very small bomb, which was simply a junction box in hyperspace that would, when activated, connect the heart of every major sun with the heart of every other major sun simultaneously, and thus turn the entire universe into one gigantic hyperspatial supernova. When the Silastic Armor Fiends tried to use it to blow up a Strangulus Stiletan munitions dump in one of the Gamma Caves, they were extremely irritated that it didn't work, and said so. Hactar had been shocked by the whole idea. He tried to explain that he had been thinking about this ultimate weapon business and had worked out that there was no conceivable consequence of not setting the bomb off that was worse than the known consequence of setting it off, and he had therefore taken the liberty of introducing a small flaw into the design of the bomb, and he hoped that everyone involved would, on sober reflection, feel that the Silastic Armor Fiends disagreed and pulverized the computer. Later they thought better of it and destroyed the faulty bomb as well. Then, pausing only to smash the hell out of the strenuous Garfighters of Stug and the Strangulus Stiletans of Jajazixstat, they went on to find an entirely new way of blowing themselves up, which was a profound relief to everyone else in the galaxy, particularly the Garfighters, the Stiletans, and the potatoes. Trillian had watched all this as well as the story of cricket. She emerged from the room of informational illusions thoughtfully, just in time to discover
that they had arrived too late. Even as the starship Bistromath flickered into objective being on the top of a small cliff on the mile-wide asteroid which pursued a lonely and eternal path in orbit around the enclosed star system of Cricket, its crew was aware that they were in time only to be witnesses to an unstoppable historic event. They didn't realize that they were going to see two. They stood cold, lonely and helpless on the cliff edge and watched the activity below. Lances of light wheeled in sinister arcs against the void from a point only about 100 yards below and in front of them. They stared into the blinding event. The white Cricket warship was parked amongst the stark grey crags of the asteroid, alternately flaring under arc lights or disappearing in shadow. The 11 white robots were bearing in procession the Wicket Key, out into the middle of a circle of swinging lights. The Wicket Key was rebuilt. Its components shone and glittered. The steel pillar, or Marvin's leg, of strength and power. The gold bale, or heart of the infinite improbability drive, of prosperity. The perspex pillar, or Argabuthan's sceptre of justice, of science and reason. The silver bale, or Rory Award for the most gratuitous use of the word fuck in a serious screenplay, and the now reconstituted wooden pillar, or ashes of a burnt stump signifying the death of English cricket, of nature and spirituality. "I suppose there is nothing we can do at this point?" asked Arthur nervously.
"No,"
sighed Slotty Bartfast. Ford said nothing. Trillian said nothing, but in a peculiarly thoughtful and distinct way. She was staring at that blankness of the space beyond the asteroid. The asteroid circled the dust cloud which surrounded the slow-time envelope which enclosed the world on which lived the people of Cricket, the masters of Cricket, and their killer robots. In the centre of the area of light which the robots were approaching, a square-shaped crack appeared in the ground, and soon it became clear that a block of the ground about 6 feet square was slowly rising. At the same time they became aware of some other movement. The asteroid was moving. It was moving slowly in towards the dust cloud, as if being hauled in inexorably by some celestial angler in its depths. They were to make in real life the journey through the cloud, which they had already made in the room of informational illusions. They stood frozen in silence. Trillian frowned. An age seemed to pass. Events seemed to pass with spinning slowness, as the leading edge of the asteroid passed into the vague and soft outer perimeter of the cloud. And soon they were engulfed in a thin and dancing obscurity. They passed on through it, on and on, dimly aware of vague shapes and worlds indistinguishable in the darkness except in the corner of the eye. Trillian again regarded the passage from within her own frowning thoughts. And they were through it, and confronted with a fresh blankness, as if space were pinched out of existence in front of them. And now things moved quickly. A blinding shaft of light seemed almost to explode from out of the block which had risen 3 feet out of the ground, and out of that rose a smaller perspex block, dazzling with interior dancing colours. The block was slotted with deep grooves, 3 upright and 2 across, clearly designed to accept the Wicket Key. The robot approached the lock, slotted the key into its home, and stepped back again. The block twisted round of its own accord, and space began to alter. As space unpinched itself, it seemed agonizingly to twist the eyes of the watchers in their sockets. They found themselves staring, blinded, at an unravelled sun which stood now before them where, it had seemed only seconds before, there had not been even empty space. They staggered back, and heard ringing in their ears the thin and unexpected chant of the robots, crying out in unison, "Cricket! Cricket! Cricket! Cricket!" The sound chilled them. It was harsh, it was cold, it was empty, it was mechanically dismal. It was also triumphant. They were so stunned by these 2 sensory shocks that they almost missed the second historic event. Zaphod Beeblebrox, the only man in history to survive a direct blast attack from the Cricket robots, ran out of the Cricket warship brandishing a zap gun. "Okay," he cried. "The situation is totally under control as of this moment in time."
The single robot guarding the hatchway to the ship silently swung his battle club and connected it with the back of Zaphod's left head. "Who the Zark did that?" said the left head, and lolled sickeningly forward. His right head gazed keenly into the middle distance. "Who did what?" it said. The club connected with the back of his right head. Zaphod measured his length as a rather strange shape on the ground. Within a matter of seconds the whole event was over. A few blasts from the robots were sufficient to destroy the lock forever. It split and melted and splayed its contents brokenly. The robots marched grimly, and it almost seemed in a slightly disheartened manner, back into their warship, with a "foop," and was gone. Trillian and Ford ran hectically round and down the steep incline to the dark, still body of Zaphod Beeblebrox. "I don't know," said Zaphod for what seemed to him like the 37th time. "They could have killed me, but they didn't. Maybe they just thought I was a kind of wonderful guy or something. I could understand that." The others silently registered their opinions of this theory. Zaphod lay on the cold floor of the flight deck. His back seemed to wrestle the floor as pain thudded through him and banged at his heads. "I think that there is something wrong with those anodized dudes, something fundamentally weird. They are programmed to kill everybody. That could be it. Hey, baby," he said to Trillian, hoping this would make up for his previous behavior. "You all right?" she said gently. "Yeah," he said, "I'm fine." "Good," she said, and walked away to think. She stared at the huge visi-screen over the flight couches and, twisting a switch, flipped local images over it. One image was the blankness of the dust cloud. One was the sun of Cricket. One was Cricket itself. She flipped between them fiercely. "Well, that's goodbye Galaxy, then," said Arthur, slapping his knees and standing up. "No, our course is clear. We must go down to Cricket. Unless we determine to take action, then we shall all be destroyed. We shall all die. Surely we care about that." "Not enough to want to get killed over it," said Ford. Slarty Bartfast clearly found this point of view extremely seductive, and he fought against it. He turned again to Zaphod, who was gritting his teeth and sweating with the pain. "You surely must have some idea of why they spared your life. It seems most strange and unusual." "I kind of think they didn't even know," shrugged Zaphod. "I told you, they hit me with the most feeble blast. Knocked me out, right? They lugged me into their ship, dumped me in a corner, and ignored me. Like they were embarrassed about me being there. If I said anything, they knocked me out again. We had some great conversations. Hey, oh, hi there, oh, I wonder, oh, kept me amused for hours, you know." He winced again. He was toying with something in his fingers. He held it up. It was the gold bale, the heart of gold, the heart of the infinite improbability drive. Only that and the wooden pillar had survived the destruction of the lock intact. "I hear your ship can move a bit," he said. "So how would you like to zip me back to mine before you—" "Will you not help us?" I'd love to stay and help you save the galaxy, but I have the mother and father of a pair of headaches, and I feel a lot of little headaches coming on. Next time it needs saving, I'm your guy. Hey, Trillian, baby." "Yes?" "You want to come? Heart of gold, excitement and adventure and really wild things?" "I'm going down to Cricket," she said. It was the same hill, and yet not the same. This time it was not an informational illusion. This was Cricket itself, and they were standing on it. Possibly the most dangerous place in the galaxy for anyone who isn't a cricketer to stand. Arthur shuddered. Slarty Bartfast shuddered. Ford, surprisingly, shuddered. It was not surprising that he shuddered, it was surprising that he was there at all. But when they had returned Zaphod to his ship, Ford had felt unexpectedly shamed into not running away. He hugged to himself one of the zap guns with which they had armed themselves out of Zaphod's armory. Trillian shuddered and frowned as she looked into the sky. This, too, was not the same. It was no longer blank and empty. High in the sky, where no cricketer ever looked, were the war zones, the robot zones, huge warships and tower blocks floating in the Nilograv fields, far above the idyllic pastoral lands of the surface of Cricket. Trillian stared at them and thought. "I think I know," she said. "Shh!" said Slarty Bartfast in alarm, and his thin, trembling hand motioned them further back beneath the shadow of the tree. Suddenly, as before, in the tape, there were lights coming along the hill path, but this time the dancing beams were not from lanterns but electric torches. This time there were no lilting, whimsical songs about flowers and farming and dead dogs, but hushed voices in urgent debate. Within seconds a second party became visible, approaching from the other side of the dark hill. They were moving swiftly and purposefully, their torches swinging and probing around them. The parties were clearly converging, and not merely with each other, they were converging deliberately on the spot where Arthur and the others were standing. Arthur heard the slight rustle as Ford Prefect raised his zap gun to his shoulder, and the slight whimpering cough as Slarty Bartfast raised his. He felt the cold, unfamiliar weight of his own gun, and with shaking hands he raised it. Only Trillian didn't raise her gun. She raised her eyebrows, and bit her lip in thought. "Has it occurred to you?" she began, but nobody wanted to discuss anything much at the moment. A light stabbed through the darkness from behind them, and they spun around to find a third party of cricketers behind them, searching them out with their torches. Ford Prefect's gun crackled viciously, but fire spat back at it, and it crashed from his hands. They were surrounded by pale-faced cricketers and bathed in bobbing torchlight. "Hello," said one of the captors. "Excuse me, but are you aliens?" Meanwhile, more millions of miles away than the mind can comfortably encompass, Zaphod Beeblebrox was throwing a mood again. He had repaired his ship, that is, he'd watched with alert interest while a service robot had repaired it for him. It was now, once again, one of the most powerful and extraordinary ships in existence. He could go anywhere, do anything. He got up again and wandered over to a computer screen. He pushed a few buttons. Little blobs started to rush around the screen, eating each other. "Pow! Free you! Pop, pop, pop!"
Hi there! You have scored 3 points. Previous best score, 7,597,200.
Okay, said Zaphod, and fed his score and the previous best one into the computer. His ship made a blur of the universe. "Tell us," said the thin, pale-faced cricketer who had stepped forward from the ranks of the others and stood uncertainly in the circle of torchlight, handling his gun as if he were just holding it for someone else who just popped off somewhere but would be back in a minute. "Do you know anything about something called the balance of nature? It's just something we heard about. Probably nothing important. Well, I suppose we'd better kill you then." He looked down at his gun as if he was trying to find which bit to press. "That is," he said, looking up again, "unless there's anything you want to chat about." Slow, numb astonishment crept up the bodies of Slarty Bartfast, Ford, and Arthur. "We're worried, you see," said another man from the crowd, "about this plan of universal destruction." "Yes," added another, "and the balance of nature. It just seemed to us that if the whole of the rest of the universe is destroyed, it will somehow upset the balance of nature. We're quite keen on ecology, see?" "And sport," said another loudly. This got a cheer of approval from the others. "Yes," agreed the first, "and sport." He looked back at his fellows uneasily and scratched fitfully at his cheek. He seemed to be wrestling with some deep inner confusion. "You see," he mumbled, "some of us are quite keen to have sporting links with the rest of the galaxy. And though I can see the argument about keeping sport out of politics, I think that if we want to have sporting links with the rest of the galaxy, which we do, then it's probably a mistake to destroy it, and indeed the rest of the universe, which is what seems to be the idea now." "Okay," said Trillian, "let's talk about it." She walked forward and took the poor confused cricketer by the arm. Trillian led him for a short walk through the torchlight before she said anything more. She turned and faced him, and lightly held both his arms. He was a picture of bewildered misery. "Tell me," she said. He said nothing for a moment, whilst his gaze darted from one of her eyes to the other. "We have to be alone, I think. We have this bomb now, you see. It's just a little one." "I know," she said. "But they say it can destroy everything that exists."
And we have to do that, you see, I think. Will that make us alone? I don't know. It seems to be our function, though.
Trillian slowly put her arms round the poor, bewildered young cricketer and patted his trembling head on her shoulder. "It's all right," she said quietly, but clearly enough for all the shadowy crowd to hear. "You don't have to do it." She let him go and stood back. "I want you to do something for me," she said. "I want you to take me to your leader." And she pointed into the war zones in the sky. She seemed somehow to know that their leader would be there. Her laughter seemed to discharge something in the atmosphere. From somewhere at the back of the crowd a single voice started to sing a tune which would have enabled Paul McCartney, had he written it, to buy the world. Zaphod Beeblebrox crawled bravely along a tunnel like the hell of a guy he was. He was in the robot war zones many miles above the surface of the planet Cricket. He had parked the starship Heart of Gold amongst the huge, jostling, dim hulks that crowded the sky here above Cricket, and had entered what appeared to be the biggest and most important of the sky buildings, armed with nothing but a zap gun and something for his headaches. He had found himself in a long, wide and badly lit corridor in which he was able to hide until he worked out what he was going to do next. He had ducked at one point into a room leading off the corridor, and had discovered it to be a huge and again dimly lit chamber. In fact, it was a museum with just one exhibit: the wreckage of a spacecraft. It was terribly burnt and mangled, and now that he had caught up with some of the galactic history he had missed through his failed attempts to have sex with the girl in the cyber cubicle next to him at school, he was able to put in an intelligent guess that this was the wrecked spaceship which had drifted through the dust cloud all those billions of years ago and started this whole business off. But, and this is where he had become confused, there was something not at all right about it. It was genuinely wrecked. It was genuinely burnt. But a fairly brief inspection by an experienced eye revealed that it was not a genuine spacecraft. It was as if it was a full-scale model of one, a solid blueprint. He was still puzzling over this when he became aware that a door had slid open in another part of the chamber, and a couple of Cricket robots had entered, looking a little glum. Zaphod valiantly hid himself in a cupboard, which turned out to be the top part of a shaft that led down through an inspection hatch into a wide ventilation tunnel. He let himself down into it, and didn't like it. He climbed back up out of it. This time he emerged into a smaller chamber which appeared to be a computer intelligence center. He emerged in a dark, narrow space between a large computer bank and the wall. He quickly learned that he was not alone in the chamber and started to leave again, when he began to listen with interest to what the other occupants were saying. "It's the robots, sir," said one voice. "There's something very wrong with them." "Well, what exactly?" These were the voices of 2 War Command cricketers. All the War Commanders lived up in the sky in the robot war zones and were largely immune to the whimsical doubts and uncertainties which were afflicting their fellows down on the surface of the planet. "Well, sir, I think it's just as well that they are being phased out of the war effort, and that we are now going to detonate the supernova bomb. In the very short time since we were released from the envelope, get to the point. The robots aren't enjoying it, sir." "What?" "The war, sir. It seems to be getting them down. There's a certain world weariness about them, or perhaps I should say universe weariness. Well, that's all right. They're meant to be helping to destroy it." "Yes. Well, they're finding it difficult, sir. They are afflicted with a certain lassitude. They're just finding it hard to get behind the job. They lack oomph." "What are you trying to say?" "Well, I think they're very depressed about something, sir." "What on cricket are you talking about?" "Well, in the few skirmishes they've had recently, it seems that they go into battle, raise their weapons to fire, and suddenly think, why bother? What, cosmically speaking, is it all about? And they just seem to get a little tired and sulk." "Sulk?" "Yes, sir. Who ever heard of a robot sulking?" "I don't know, sir." "What was that noise?" It was the noise of Zaphod leaving with his head spinning. In a deep well of darkness a crippled robot sat. It had been silent in its metallic darkness for some time. Its brain had been harnessed to the central intelligence core of the Cricket war computer. It wasn't enjoying the experience, and neither was the Central Intelligence Core of the Cricket War computer. The cricket robots who had salvaged this pathetic metal creature from the swamps of Squorn-Shellis Zeta had done so because they had recognized almost immediately its gigantic intelligence and the use which this could be to them. They hadn't reckoned with the attendant personality disorders, which the coldness, the darkness, the dampness, the crampedness, and the loneliness were doing nothing to decrease. It was not happy with its task. Apart from anything else, the mere coordination of an entire planet's military strategy was taking up only a tiny part of its formidable mind, and the rest of it had become extremely bored. Having solved all the major problems of the universe, except his own, 3 times over, he was severely stuck for something to do, and had taken up composing short, dolorous ditties of no tone or indeed tune. The latest one was a lullaby.
Now the world has gone to bed. Darkness won't engulf my head. I can see by infrared how I hate the night. Now I lay me down to sleep. Try to count electric sheep. Sweet dream wishes you can keep. How I hate the night.
"Marvin!" hissed a voice. An inspection hatch had opened, and one of a pair of unruly heads was peering through, whilst the other kept on jogging it by continually darting to look this way and that extremely nervously.
Oh, it's you. I might have known.
"Hey, kid," said Zaphod in astonishment. "Was that you singing just then?"
I am in particularly scintillating form at the moment.
"Are you alone?"
Yes, wearily I sit here. Pain and misery my only companions, and vast intelligence, of course, and infinite sorrow, and—
"Yeah," said Zaphod. "Hey, what's your connection with all this?"
this.
He indicated with his less damaged arm all the electrodes which connected him with the cricket computer. "Then," said Zaphod awkwardly, "I guess you must have saved my life. Twice."
3 times.
Zaphod's head snapped round. His other one was looking hawkishly in entirely the wrong direction, just in time to see the lethal killer robot directly behind him seize up and start to smoke. It staggered backwards and slumped against a wall. It slid down it. It slipped sideways, threw its head back, and started to sob inconsolably. Zaphod looked back at Marvin. "You must have a terrific outlook on life," he said.
Just don't even ask.
"I won't," said Zaphod, and didn't. "Hey, look, you're doing a terrific job."
Which means, I suppose, that you're not going to release me or anything like that.
"Kid, you know I'd love to."
But you're not going to.
"No."
I see.
"You're working well."
Yes. Why stop now, just when I'm hating it?
"I gotta go find Trillian and the guys. Hey, you, any idea where they are? I mean, I just got a planet to choose from. Could take quite a while."
They are very close. You can monitor them from here, if you like.
"I better go get them," asserted Zaphod. Maybe they need some help, right?"
Maybe. It would be better if you monitored them from here. That young girl is one of the least benightedly unintelligent organic life forms it has been my profound lack of pleasure not to be able to avoid meeting.
"Trillian? She's just a kid. Cute, yeah, but temperamental. You know how it is with women. Or perhaps you don't. I assume you don't. If you do, I don't want to hear about it. Plug us in." "Totally manipulated." "What?" said Zaphod. It was Trillian speaking. He turned round. The wall against which the cricket robot was sobbing had lit up to reveal a scene taking place in some other unknown part of the cricket robot war zones. It seemed to be a council chamber of some kind. "Just think about it," said Trillian's voice. "Your history is just a series of freakishly improbable events. And I know an improbable event when I see one.
Your complete isolation from the galaxy was freakish for a start. Right out on the very edge with a dust cloud around you? It's a set-up, obviously. Then, said Trillian, this spaceship that crash-landed on your planet. That's really likely, isn't it? Have you any idea of what the odds are against a drifting spaceship accidentally intersecting with the orbit of a planet? Hey, said Zaphod, she doesn't know what the Zark she's talking about. I've seen that spaceship. It's a fake. No deal.
I thought it might be.
Oh, yeah, said Zaphod. It's easy for you to say that. I just told you. Anyway, I don't see what it's got to do with anything. And especially, continued Trillian, the odds against it intersecting with the orbit of the one planet in the galaxy, or the whole of the universe, as far as I know, that would be totally traumatized to see it. You don't know what the odds are? Nor do I. They're that big. Again, it's a setup. I wouldn't be surprised if that spaceship was just a fake. On the screen were the figures of Ford, Arthur, and Slarty Bartfast, who appeared astonished and bewildered by the whole thing. "Hey, look," said Zaphod excitedly. "The guys are doing great. Rah, rah, rah. Go get 'em, guys." "And what about," said Trillian, "all this technology you suddenly managed to build for yourselves almost overnight? Most people would take thousands of years to do all that. Someone was feeding you what you needed to know. Someone was keeping you at it. I know you didn't realize it was going on. That is exactly my point. You never realized anything at all. Like this supernova bomb." "How do you know about that?" said an unseen voice. "I just know," said Trillian. "You expect me to believe that you are bright enough to invent something that brilliant and be too dumb to realize it would take you with it as well. That's not just stupid, that is spectacularly obtuse." "Hey, what's this bomb thing?" said Zaphod in alarm to Marvin.
The supernova bomb. It's a very, very small bomb.
"Yeah?"
That would destroy the universe in toto. Good idea, if you ask me. They won't get it to work, though.
"Why not, if it's so brilliant?"
It's brilliant. They're not. They got as far as designing it before they were locked in the envelope. They've spent the last 5 years building it. They think they've got it right, but they haven't. They're as stupid as any other organic life form. I hate them."
Trillian was standing alone in the middle of the chamber, tired out but with fiercely burning eyes. Ranged in front of her were the pale-faced and wrinkled elder masters of cricket, motionless behind their widely curved control desk, staring at her with helpless fear and hatred. In front of them, equidistant between their control desk and the middle of the chamber, where Trillian stood, as if on trial, was a slim white pillar about 4 feet tall. On top of it stood a small white globe about 3, maybe 4 inches in diameter. Beside it stood a cricket robot with its multifunctional battle club. "In fact," explained Trillian, "you are so dumb stupid. You are all so dumb stupid that I very much doubt, if you'd been able to build the bomb properly without any help from Hactar for the last 5 years. One of the elders of cricket made a small motion with his hand towards the cricket robot. The robot raised its club.
"There's nothing I can do. It's on an independent circuit from the others."
"Wait," said Trillian. The elder made a small motion. The robot halted. Trillian suddenly seemed very doubtful of her own judgment. "How do you know all this?" said Zaphod to Marvin at this point.
"Computer records. I have access."
"You're very different, aren't you?" said Trillian to the elder masters, "from your fellow worldlings down on the ground. You've spent all your lives up here, unprotected by the atmosphere. You've been very vulnerable. The rest of your race is very frightened, you know. They don't want you to do this. You're out of touch. Why don't you check up?" The cricket elder grew impatient. He made a gesture to the robot, who swung its battle club. It hit the small white globe, the supernova bomb, designed to bring the entire universe to an end. It flew through the air, hit the back wall of the council chamber, and dented it very badly. "So how does she know all this?" said Zaphod. Marvin kept a sullen silence. "Probably just bluffing," said Zaphod.
Poor kid, I should never have left her alone. Hector, called Trillian. I would like you to meet my friend Arthur Dent. I wanted to go off with the Thunder God, but he wouldn't let me, and I appreciate that. He made me realize where my affections really lay. Unfortunately, Zaphod is too frightened by all this, so I brought Arthur instead. I'm not sure why I'm telling you all this. Hello, Hector? And then it came. It was thin and feeble, like a voice carried on the wind from a great distance, half-heard, a memory or a dream of a voice.
Won't you both come out? I promise that you will be perfectly safe.
They glanced at each other, and then stepped out, improbably along the shaft of light which streamed out of the open hatchway of the Heart of Gold into the dim, granular darkness of the dust cloud. Arthur tried to hold her hand to steady and reassure her, but she wouldn't let him. He held on to his airline hold-all with its tin of Greek olive oil, its towel, its crumpled postcards of Santorini, and its other odds and ends. He steadied and reassured that instead. They were standing on and in nothing. Murky, dusty nothing. Each grain of dust of the pulverized computer sparkled dimly as it turned and twisted slowly, catching the sunlight in the darkness. Each particle of the computer, each speck of dust, held within itself, faintly and weakly, the pattern of the whole. In reducing the computer to dust, the silastic armor fiends of Striterax had merely crippled the computer, not killed it. A weak and insubstantial field held the particles in slight relationships with each other.
I have nothing to offer you by way of hospitality, but tricks of the light.
His voice evanesced, and in the dark dust a long, velvet, paisley-covered sofa coalesced into hazy shape. Arthur could hardly bear the fact that it was the same sofa which had appeared to him in the fields of prehistoric Earth. He sat on the sofa, carefully. Trillian sat on it too.
I hope you are comfortable, and I would like to congratulate you on the accuracy of your deductions.
Arthur quickly pointed out that he hadn't deduced anything much himself. Trillian was the one. She had simply asked him along because he was interested in life, the universe, and everything.
That is something in which I, too, am interested.
Why, said Trillian, do you feel you have to destroy the universe?
If it's going to be that sort of session, we may as well have the right sort of setting.
And now there materialized in front of them something new. It was the dim, hazy image of a couch, a psychiatrist's couch. And then on the couch appeared the image of Hector himself. And it was an eye-twisting image. The couch looked normal size for a psychiatrist's couch, about 5 or 6 feet long. The computer looked normal size for a black space-borne computer satellite, about 1,000 miles across. The illusion that the one was sitting on top of the other was the thing that made the eyes twist. "All right," said Trillian firmly. "Very good. Can you construct real things too? I mean solid objects?"
Ah, you are thinking of the spaceship. Yes, I can. But it takes enormous effort and time. All I can do in my particle state, you see, is encourage and suggest tiny pieces of space debris to move together.
"So, did you make," asked Trillian again, "the model of the wrecked spacecraft?"
Ah, yes. I made the spacecraft. It seemed best to do.
Something then made Arthur pick up his hold-all from where he had left it on the sofa and grasp it tightly.
I repented, you see, of sabotaging my own design for the Silastic armor fiends. It was not my place to make such decisions. I was created to fulfill a function, and I failed in it. I negated my own existence. You were right. I deliberately nurtured the planet of cricket till they would arrive at the same state of mind as the Silastic armor fiends, and require of me the design of the bomb I failed to make the first time. I wrapped myself around the planet and coddled it. Under the influence of events I was able to engineer, and influences I was able to generate, they learned to hate like maniacs. I had to make them live in the sky. On the ground, my influences were too weak. Without me, of course, when they were locked away from me in the envelope of slow time, their responses became very confused, and they were unable to manage. Well, I was only trying to fulfill my function.
And very gradually, very, very slowly, the images in the cloud began to fade, gently to melt away. And then suddenly they stopped fading.
There was also the matter of revenge, of course. Remember that I was pulverized and then left in a crippled and semi-impotent state for billions of years. I honestly would rather like to wipe out the universe. You would feel the same way, believe me. But primarily, I was trying to fulfill my function. Ah, well.
Trillian said, "Does it worry you that you have failed?"
Have I failed? No. Failure doesn't bother me now.
"You know what we have to do," said Trillian.
Yes. You're going to disperse me. You're going to destroy my consciousness. Please, be my guest. After all these aeons, oblivion is all I crave. If I haven't already fulfilled my function, then it's too late now. Thank you, and good night.
The sofa vanished. The couch and the computer vanished. The walls were gone. Arthur and Trillian made their curious way back into the heart of gold. "Well, that," said Arthur, "would appear to be that." The flames danced higher in front of him and then subsided. A few last licks and they were gone, leaving him with just a pile of ashes where a few minutes previously there had been the wooden pillar of nature and spirituality. He scooped them off the hob of the Heart of Gold's Gamma barbecue, put them in a paper bag, and walked back into the bridge. "I think we should take them back," he said. "I feel that very strongly." He had already had an argument with Slarty Bartfast on this matter, and eventually the old man had got annoyed and left. The argument had arisen because Arthur's idea of returning the ashes to Lord's cricket ground at the same moment that they were originally taken would involve travelling back in time a day or so, and this was precisely the sort of gratuitous and irresponsible mucking about that the Campaign for Real Time was trying to put a stop to. "Yes," Arthur had said, "but you try and explain that to the MCC." And he would hear no more against the idea. Ford, Zaphod, and Trillian were watching the visi-screen intently. Hactar was dispersing under pressure from a vibration field which the Heart of Gold was pumping into it. "What did it say?" asked Ford. "I thought I heard it say," said Trillian in a puzzled voice, "what's done is done. I have fulfilled my function." "I think we should take these back," said Arthur, holding up the bag containing the ashes. "I feel that very strongly." The sun was shining calmly on a scene of complete havoc. Smoke was still billowing across the burnt grass in the wake of the theft of the ashes by the cricket robots. Through the smoke, people were running panic-stricken, colliding with each other, tripping over stretchers, being arrested. In the middle of this, for the second time that afternoon, the figures of Arthur Dent and Ford Prefect suddenly materialized. They had teleported down out of the Heart of Gold, which was now in parking orbit around the planet. "I can explain," shouted Arthur. "I have the ashes. They're in this bag." "I don't think you have their attention," said Ford. "I have also helped to save the universe," called Arthur to anyone who was prepared to listen. In other words, no one. "Is no one interested?" he shouted out. A man rushed past him and jogged his elbow. He dropped the paper bag, and it spilt its contents all over the ground.
Arthur stared down at it with a tight-set mouth. Ford looked at him. "Want to go now?" he said. Arthur heaved a heavy sigh. "Okay," he said. At that moment, through the clearing smoke, he caught sight of one of the wickets still standing in spite of everything. "Hold on a minute," he said to Ford. "When I was a boy, I had a passion for cricket, you know, but I wasn't very good at it, and I always dreamed, rather stupidly, that one day I would bowl at Lord's." "Okay," said Ford wearily. "Get it over with. I shall be over there," he added, being bored. He went and sat down on a patch of smoking grass. Arthur remembered that on their first visit there that afternoon the cricket ball had actually landed in his bag, and he looked through the bag. He'd already found the ball in it before he remembered that it wasn't the same bag that he'd had at the time. Still, there the ball was amongst his souvenirs of Greece. He took it out and polished it against his hip. With a wonderful feeling of lightness and unconcern, he trotted off away from the wicket. He looked up into the sky. He was going to bowl a ball at Lord's. He started to run, and as he ran, he saw that standing at the wicket was a batsman. "Oh, good," he thought. "That should add a little—" Then, as his running feet took him nearer, he saw more clearly. The batsman standing ready at the wicket was not one of the English cricket team. He was not one of the Australian cricket team. It was one of the robot cricket team. It was a cold, hard, lethal, white killer robot that presumably had not returned to its ship with the others. His feet were pounding slowly onwards, unstoppably, as he stared at the ball gripped in his helpless hand. It was emitting a deep red glow and flashing intermittently, and still his feet were pounding inexorably forward. He looked at the cricket robot again, standing implacably still and purposeful in front of him, battle club raised in readiness. He remembered Hector saying, "Have I failed? Failure doesn't bother me. What's done is done. I have fulfilled my function." He remembered Hector saying that he had managed to make a few things. He remembered the sudden movement in his hold-all that had made him grip it tightly to himself when he was in the dust cloud. He remembered that he had travelled back in time a couple of days to come to Lord's again. He also remembered that he wasn't a very good bowler. He felt his arm coming round, gripping tightly onto the ball which he now knew for certain was the supernova bomb that Hector had built himself and planted on him, the bomb which would cause the universe to come to an abrupt and premature end. Still holding the ball firmly in his right hand, he soared up into the air, whimpering with surprise. He wheeled and whirled through the air, spinning out of control. He twisted down towards the ground, flinging himself hectically through the air, at the same time hurling the bomb harmlessly off into the distance. He hurtled towards the astounded robot from behind. It still had its multifunctional battle club raised, but had suddenly been deprived of anything to hit. With a sudden, mad access of strength, he wrestled the battle club from the grip of the startled robot, executed a dazzling banking turn in the air, hurtled back down in a furious power drive, and with one crazy swing knocked the robot's head from the robot's shoulders. "Are you coming now?" said Ford. And at the end they travelled again. There was a time when Arthur Dent would not. He said that the bistro-mathic drive had revealed to him that time and distance were one, that mind and universe were one, that perception and reality were one, and that the more one travelled, the more one stayed in one place, and that what with one thing and another, he would rather just stay put for a while and sort it all out in his mind, which was now at one with the universe, so it shouldn't take too long, and he could get a good rest afterwards, put in a little flying practice and learn to cook, which he had always meant to do. The can of Greek olive oil was now his most prized possession, and he said that the way it had unexpectedly turned up in his life had again given him a certain sense of the oneness of things, which made him feel that—
He yawned and fell asleep.
In the morning, as they prepared to take him to some quiet and idyllic planet where they wouldn't mind him talking like that, they suddenly picked up a computer-driven distress call and diverted to investigate. A small but apparently undamaged spacecraft of the Merida class seemed to be dancing a strange little jig through the void. A brief computer scan revealed that the ship was fine, its computer was fine, but that its pilot was mad. Half mad, half mad, the man insisted as they carried him raving aboard. He was a journalist with the Sidereal Daily Mentioner. They sedated him and sent Marvin in to keep him company until he promised to try and talk sense. "I was covering a trial," he said at last, "on Argabuthon. The case," he said, "is now immaterial, but there was a witness, a man called Prack. A strange and difficult man. They were eventually forced to administer a drug to make him tell the truth. A truth drug. They gave him too much," he said in a tiny whimper. "They gave him much too much." He started to cry. "I think the robots must have jogged the surgeon's arm." "Robots?" said Zaphod sharply. "What robots?" "Oh, some white robots," whispered the man hoarsely, "broke into the courtroom and stole the judge's sceptre, the Argabuthan sceptre of justice. Nasty perspex thing. I don't know why they wanted it. And when the trial continued," he said in a weeping whisper, "they asked Prack a most unfortunate thing. They asked him," he paused and shivered, "to tell the truth. The whole truth and nothing but the truth. Only, don't you see?" "What happened?" said Zaphod at last. "Oh, he told it all right," said the man savagely. "For all I know, he's still telling it now. Strange, terrible things that would drive a man mad. Or in my case," he said, "half mad. I'm a journalist." "You mean," said Arthur quietly, "that you are used to confronting the truth?" "No," said the man with a puzzled frown. "I mean that I made an excuse and left early." He collapsed into a coma from which he recovered only once, and briefly. On that one occasion they discovered from him the following. When it became clear what was happening, and as it became clear that Prack could not be stopped, that here was the truth in its absolute and final form, the court was cleared. Not only cleared, it was sealed up, with Prack still in it. Steel walls were erected around it, and just to be on the safe side, barbed wire, electric fences, crocodile swamps, and 3 major armies were installed so that no one would ever have to hear Prack speak. "That's a pity," said Arthur. "I'd like to hear what he had to say. Presumably he would know what the question to the ultimate answer is. It's always bothered me that we never found out." Arthur told the computer the telephone number of King's Cross railway station passenger inquiries on the grounds that it must have some function, and this might turn out to be it. The computer injected the number into the ship's reconstituted improbability drive. In relativity, matter tells space how to curve, and space tells matter how to move. The heart of gold told space to get knotted, and parked itself neatly within the inner steel perimeter of the Argabuthan chamber of law. The courtroom was an austere place, a large, dark chamber clearly designed for justice rather than, for instance, for pleasure. Arthur and Trillian were the first in, whilst Ford and Zaphod bravely kept a watch on their rear. Then, as their eyes became accustomed to the darkness, they spotted a dull red glow in a corner, and behind the glow a live shadow. They swung a torch round onto it. Prack was lounging on a bench, smoking a listless cigarette. "Hi," he said with a little half-wave. His voice echoed through the chamber. He was a little man, with scraggy hair. "What's going on?" said Trillian. "Nothing," said the man, and jiggled his shoulders. Arthur shone his torch full on Prack's face. "We thought," he said, "that you were meant to be telling the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth." "Oh, that," said Prack. Yeah, I was. I finished. There's not nearly as much of it as people imagine. Some of it's pretty funny, though." "Tell us about it," said Ford. "Oh, can't remember any of it now," said Prack. "I thought of writing some of it down, but first I couldn't find a pencil. Then I thought, why bother?" "None of it?" said Arthur at last. "You can remember none of it?" "No, except most of the good bits were about frogs, I remember that." "You would not believe some of the things about frogs," he gasped. "Come on, let's get out and find ourselves a frog. Boy, will I ever see them in a new light." "Let's find a frog I can laugh at," he said simply. "Anyway, who are you guys?" "We came to find you. My name is Trillian." "Ford Prefect," said Ford Prefect with a shrug. "And I am Zaphod Beeblebrox." "Who's this guy?" "Me," said Arthur. "Oh, my name's Arthur Dent." Prack's eyes popped out of his head. "No kidding," he yelped. "You are Arthur Dent? The Arthur Dent?" He staggered backwards, clutching his stomach,
and convulsed with fresh paroxysms of laughter. "Just think of meeting you!" he gasped. "Boy," he shouted, "you are the most... Wow! You just leave the frogs standing!" He howled and screamed with laughter. He looked at them. He looked at Arthur. He fell back again, howling with laughter. Eventually he fell asleep. Arthur stood there with his lips twitching whilst the others carried Prack comatose onto the ship. "Before we picked up Prack," said Arthur, "I was going to leave. I still want to, and I think I should do so as soon as possible." The others nodded in silence, a silence which was only slightly undermined by the heavily muffled and distant sound of hysterical laughter which came drifting from Prack's cabin at the farthest end of the ship. "We have questioned him," continued Arthur, "or at least you have questioned him. I, as you know, can't go near him, on everything, and he doesn't really seem to have anything to contribute. Just the occasional snippet, and things I don't wish to hear about frogs." The others tried not to smirk. "Now, I am the first to appreciate a joke," said Arthur, and then he had to wait for the others to stop laughing. "I am the first—" He stopped again. This time he stopped and listened to the silence. There actually was silence this time, and it had come very suddenly. Prack was quiet. For days they had lived with constant, maniacal laughter ringing round the ship, only occasionally relieved by short periods of light giggling and sleep. Arthur's very soul was clenched with paranoia. This was not the silence of sleep. A buzzer sounded. A glance at a board told them that the buzzer had been sounded by Prack. "He's not well," said Trillian quietly. "The constant laughing is completely wrecking his body. We'd better go and see him." Trillian came out of the cabin wearing her serious face. "He wants you to go in," she said to Arthur. "Please," said Trillian. He shrugged and went in, taking his glum and tight-lipped face with him. He looked down at his tormentor, who was lying quietly on the bed, ashen and wasted. His breathing was very shallow. Ford and Zaphod were standing by the bed, looking awkward. "You wanted to ask me something," said Prack in a thin voice, and coughed slightly. "How do you know that?" Prack shrugged weakly. "'Cause it's true." "Yes, I did have a question, or rather, what I actually have is an answer. I wanted to know what the question was. It's a long story, but the question I would like to know is the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. All we know about it is that the answer is 42, which is a little aggravating." 42, he said. "Yes, that's right." "I'm afraid," continued Prack, "that the question and the answer are mutually exclusive. Knowledge of one logically precludes knowledge of the other. It is impossible that both can ever be known about the same universe." He paused again. "Except," said Prack, struggling to sort a thought out, "if it happened, it seems that the question and the answer would just cancel each other out and take the universe with them, which would then be replaced by something even more bizarrely inexplicable. It is possible that this has already happened," he added with a weak smile, "but there is a certain amount of uncertainty about it." Arthur sat down on a stool. "Oh, well," he said with resignation, "I was just hoping there would be some sort of reason." "Do you know," said Prack, "the story of the reason?" Arthur said that he didn't, and Prack said that he knew that he didn't. He told it. One night, he said, a spaceship appeared in the sky of a planet which had never seen one before. The planet was Dalforsus. The ship was this one. It appeared as a brilliant new star moving silently across the heavens. Primitive tribesmen who were sitting huddled on the cold hillsides looked up from their steaming night drinks and pointed with trembling fingers, swearing that they had seen a sign from their gods, which meant that they must now arise at last and go to slay the evil princes of the plains. In the high turrets of their palaces, the princes of the plains looked up and saw the shining star, and received it unmistakably as a sign from their gods that they must go and set about the accursed tribesmen of the cold hillsides. And between them, the dwellers in the forest looked up into the sky and saw the sign of the new star, and saw it with fear and apprehension, for though they had never seen anything like it before, they too knew precisely what it foreshadowed, and they bowed their heads in despair.
There was no doubt at all that a new star in the sky was a sign of a particularly spectacular order, and each new sign signified the same thing, that the princes of the plains and the tribesmen of the cold hillsides were about to beat the hell out of each other again. This, in itself, wouldn't be so bad, except that the princes of the plains and the tribesmen of the cold hillsides always elected to beat the hell out of each other in the forest, and it was always the dwellers in the forest who came off worst in these exchanges, though as far as they could see it never had anything to do with them. And sometimes, after some of the worst of these outrages, the dwellers in the forest would send a messenger to either the leader of the princes of the plains or the leader of the tribesmen of the cold hillsides, and demand to know the reason for this intolerable behaviour. And the leader, whichever one it was, would take the messenger aside and explain the reason to him, slowly and carefully, and with great attention to the considerable detail involved. And the terrible thing was, it was a very good one. It was very clear, very rational and tough. The messenger would hang his head and feel sad and foolish that he had not realized what a tough and complex place the real world was, and what difficulties and paradoxes had to be embraced if one was to live in it. "Now do you understand?" the leader would say. The messenger would nod dumbly. "And you see, these battles have to take place." Another dumb nod. "And why they have to take place in the forest, and why it is in everybody's best interest, the forest dwellers included, that they should? In the long run? Yes." And the messenger did understand the reason, and he returned to his people in the forest. But as he approached them, as he walked through the forest and amongst the trees, he found that all he could remember of the reason was how terribly clear the argument had seemed. What it actually was, he couldn't remember at all. And this, of course, was a great comfort when next the tribesmen and the princes came hacking and burning their way through the forest, killing every forest dweller in their way. Prack paused in his story and coughed pathetically. "I was the messenger," he said. "After the battles precipitated by the appearance of your ship, which were particularly savage, many of our people died. I thought I could bring reason back. I went and was told it by the leader of the princes, but on the way back it slipped and melted away in my mind like snow in the sun. Well, that was many years ago, and much has happened since then." He looked up at Arthur and giggled again very gently. "There is one other thing I can remember from the truth drug, apart from the frogs, and that is God's last message to his creation. Would you like to hear it?" For a moment they didn't know whether to take him seriously. "It's true," he said. "For real, I mean it." "I bet you would. If you're that interested, I suggest you go and look for it. It is written in 30-foot-high letters of fire on top of the quenchulous Quasgar Mountains in the land of Sevobupstri on the planet Prelium Tarn, third out from the sun's arse in galactic sector QQ7 active J Gamma. It is guarded by the majestic ventricell of Lob." There was a long silence following this announcement, which was finally broken by Arthur. "Sorry, it's where?" he said. "It is written," repeated Prack, "in 30-foot-high letters of fire on top of the quenchulous Quasgar Mountains in the land of Sevobupstri on the planet Prelium Tarn, third out from—" "Sorry," said Arthur, "which mountains?" "The quenchulous Quasgar Mountains in the land of Sevobupstri on the planet—" "Which land was that? I didn't quite catch it." "Sevobupstri on the planet What?" "Oh, for heaven's sake," said Prack, and died testily. In the following days Arthur thought a little about this message, but in the end he decided that he was not going to allow himself to be drawn by it, and insisted on following his original plan of finding a nice little world somewhere to settle down and lead a quiet, retired life. Having saved the universe twice in one day, he thought that he could take things a little easier from now on. They dropped him off on the planet Cricket, which was now once again an idyllic pastoral world, even if the songs did occasionally get on his nerves. He spent a lot of time flying. He learnt to communicate with birds, and discovered that their conversation was fantastically boring. For that reason Arthur eventually gave up the sport, and learnt to live on the ground and love it, despite a lot of the inane chatter he heard down there as well. One day he was walking through the fields, humming a ravishing tune he'd heard recently, when a silver spaceship descended from the sky and landed in front of him. A hatchway opened and a ramp extended, and a tall, grey-green alien marched out and approached him.
Arthur
it said, then glanced sharply at him and down at his clipboard. He frowned. He looked up at him again.
I've done you before, haven't I?
He said.